is replacing a lot of things. That's one thing. Second thing is, since Odisha is a very climate risk state in India, if I can say, so it is also very important to learn how climate affects young children on their learning, and subsistence also. So these two are very important for me to learn. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And thank you also for bringing in the regional sort of context. We will have a lot of conversations around Odisha, Assam, Gujarat. Those are the 3 states where we've done the research on which we've based this theme as well today. Great. Thank you for your responses, and I hope you keep sort of churning around that on what will make this gathering powerful for you and keep acting on it as well. So moving forward, I think like for us at Quest2Learn, we strive to kind of build on conversations, and some of these conversations, topics that we just discussed in terms of technology and how that is impacting learning, is something that we have been kind of speaking about since 2016. But I think at the heart of Quest2Learn is really the learner, and this quote is from the first Quest2Learn that we had done in 2016, and that kind of still remains the essence for us. But over the years, as we have engaged in conversations, this ecosystem around the learner has kind of expanded, and there are multiple themes which have kind of emerged. With the learner has come the role of the educator as well. And what is their role in building relationships with the learner? How do we keep educators inspired as we are moving forward? What is their relationship with technology as it is kind of becoming more prominent? And how are we using technology to create more choice-based learning pathways for learners? From learning platforms which are mobile-based, we've moved to platform economy as something which a lot of young people are engaging with today. And then what does this change mean for young people as well? We've looked at issues of inclusion as well, especially from a gender lens. And we've also engaged with questions around impact. And what does impact need to look like when we are talking about purpose and meaning? How do we create this impact at scale? What does it mean for the nature of partnerships and collaborations as well? And interestingly, as we move to doing more regional summits, Quest2Learn, we did a couple of them in the northeastern region. We did one in Gujarat as well. What really emerged was the role of civil society organizations itself in today's day and age. And what is the kind of strengthening that civil society organizations need? What is the capacity building needs? What are the governance needs for these organizations if we really have to create this impact at scale and keep the learner at the center of it all? We also had a lot of conversations around AI. In 2019, we had a panel on AI, which was about AI for learning, earning, and well-being. And it seems like a lot of conversations we had back then have become the reality today. It's almost like the future we were talking about is here. So what does that mean for us as we plan our way forward? And that's what we really wanted to kind of talk about over the next 2 days. Really kind of think about the kind of future we want to create for our young people. So this theme actually is a culmination of a year-long research that our team has been doing, and you'll hear more about it through the day as well. And what we are really hoping is that on the first day, we spend time talking about what are the multiple possibilities for the future that we have, and these kind of can straddle between hope and anxiety. When you'll hear from the young people, you'll hear a lot of anxiety in their voice as they are thinking about the future as well. So what are some of these utopias and dystopias which might coexist as we think about the future? We're also going to do a deep dive today into futures literacy and futures thinking as a concept and how it has evolved, and why are we talking about it today? Why is it important to talk about it today as well? We have parallel tracks on some of these themes: AI, climate change, how it's going to impact learning, how it's going to impact work, with a very impressive lineup of speakers. So I hope you've signed up for your parallel tracks. If you haven't, please go to the registration counter and do that. We have immersive exhibits, which are actually going to give you a glimpse of what the world is going to look like in 2045. And given the research was done in Odisha, Assam, and Gujarat, you'll get a sense of what young people in these 3 states are imagining as the future as well. And apart from that, we have a music performance in the evening. We have a band called Somersault, which has come all the way from Shillong. And they are going to kind of bring in their essence into the evening. We have a get-together planned for all of you, so I hope all of you are going to stay back for that as well. So that's today. And we are really hoping that we are kind of, able to sort of process the multiple sort of articulations of futures that emerge today. And tomorrow, we're going to talk about what are the actions that we need to take if we want to move towards a desired future state, right? And instead of just taking on what is coming our way in terms of trend, can we be proactively shaping the future that we want to create? So we'll have voices from different stakeholders who will have a role to play, including all of us as individuals. So we have a policy panel, we have a panel on civil society and philanthropy in the future. We have some very cool speakers talking about how they are looking at alternative models at the intersection of AI and climate change as well. So that's what the 2 days are going to be about. I hope you're finding this interesting enough to kind of engage with it meaningfully and thoughtfully and kind of bring this space alive as part of the gathering. At this, there is one more question for all of you, is that what is the one thing that you will do to make the most of this experience at an individual level? So again, think for a moment and share it with a partner, hopefully a new one this time. But you can think in 3 people also. I'm looking at my watch. All right. I hope that you have been able to identify some actions for yourself. So be mindful of that over the 2 days. I hope you've learned what other people are going to do and maybe imbibe some of that as well. As I hand it over to the next session, I have one more question for you. And for that, I'd like you all to take out your phone, scan the QR code that's there, or you can go on mentimeter.com and type in the code 18445831 and answer the question, what is the one word that comes to your mind when you think about the future in 2045? Just one word. So the future is, and fill in the blank. Type it in the Mentimeter. Can we see the... Oh, the future is scary. Right in the center. It's also hopeful along with scary, so that's good. It's inclusive, it's unpredictable, it's participatory, it's sustainable. The future is possibilities. The future is life on Mars. All right, great. With that, I'll hand it over to Akash, the CEO of Quest2Learn, to take this forward and take us into the future. Maybe a round of applause for him.
morning, everyone. And it's great to see a lot of you here, lots of friends, lots of co-travelers, lots of people who've inspired me through my own journey over the last 22 years. And, you know, if I thought that 22 years back that this is what would be happening today and this is what conversation we were having, I probably did not imagine that this could be possible. But just the fact that all of you are here and show up the way you have really means a lot to us, and really looking forward to having this conversation with all of you. Over the last 2 decades or so, I think 2 questions that have been at the center of our inquiry at Quest. One is, how do we give young people more confidence and agency to navigate their own paths? The second is, how do we do it collaboratively and not do it alone? And I think those 2 questions have constantly kept our hopes alive, at the same time have also constantly forced us to, or not forced us, but really made us curious to learn, and made me curious to learn as to how do we really keep learning about what's coming, what's next. And that's what's kept us going, the soul song, as we say. What's the soul song? We try to sort of build that continuous learning idea in what we do. And so today we really want to talk about this idea of hopeful futures, but also be aware that there is anxiety in the way, and a lot of you, I think, spoke about that, sort of this balance between anxious, anxiety, or scary and hopeful. And so maybe these are a few learnings and reflections around how do we really go from separation, and a separation that we have all been experiencing. One is the human nature separation, this idea that, you know, we've not coexisted with nature in a way that we've made nature thrive. We've been extractive in the way we have gone about our relationship with nature, largely driven by a lot of sort of materialistic kind of way of extracting and using it for our benefit, but not necessarily coexisted with nature for us to thrive and for all life to thrive in the world. And that's where we are today with climate crisis, the way we've been talking about it. We are at the edge of climate crisis. We've had this sort of masculine-feminine separation where we've not necessarily taken both sides of competition and collaboration and really looked at how to embrace both. We tend to celebrate wins and competition over collaboration, but we want all of us to, you know, do things together, but our mental models are not really geared from the school education system to be able to collaborate or be nurturing or to be caring or to be compassionate. Those sort of values are things that we have not been able to fully embed in who we are. We've also had this sort of inner and outer separation, the inner being that trusting our inner wisdom of who we are and what we are capable of, but listening to what the larger societal norms have to say and really trying to align with that. So we sometimes tend to not listen to ourselves and anchor it in ourself, but in what society or what people would say. And therefore there is this separation between the inner and outer. And finally, there is this left brain and right brain separation, where we tend to value more things around being able to, instead of the right brain that is more relational, that thinks in wholes, we tend to be a lot more left brain oriented, which is all about logic and rationale, and we tend to celebrate that more than thinking in wholes, thinking in relations, thinking in ways of being that is more complete. And these separations have really sort of forced us to really rethink and reconnect with ourselves, really reconnect with saying who we are as individuals, we are on that journey to try to reconnect. And that reconnection will be when human and nature, masculine, feminine, the left brain, right brain, and the inner and outer, we are able to embrace both and not sort of think that I am only one or the other, but really embracing both ourselves and our multiple selves to be able to feel complete, whole human beings who can be authentic and driven by all the different aspects of our being. And while we are going through this journey of reconnection, there is this idea that the world as we knew it, which was the machine metaphor, which was all about command and control, has shifted from being command and control to an interconnected living system or a living being. Not just the earth has always been a living being, but we need to start thinking about things to be more alive and interconnected. We tend to, not recognize the relationship, say, that the oceans or the rainforests have with human life. And that is, again, something that creates a lot of dissonance within us when we actually face a lot of stress. That stress is actually at multiple levels. It's because of a lot of this disconnect that we are seeing between climate and human beings, and that is experienced by us at an individual level as well. So we feel that we are very stressed, but that's also because of a lot of things that are happening in the earth, that are happening to us within our own organizations, and as a result, we feel stressed, we feel anxious, we are not always ready for change that is coming and that we are experiencing. And as we go through this sort of process of change, we really need to recognize that while this continuous change is causing a lot of uncertainty, it's causing a lot of anxiety, I think uncertainty is not necessarily a very bad thing. We can try to embrace uncertainty. We can think about uncertainty and the complexity as beautiful, as ways to find ways of imagining possibilities in the uncertainty, rather than thinking like that, oh my God, everything is uncertain now, nothing can be done, but really be able to imagine use uncertainty really as a force for good and force for being able to think of multiple possibilities. And therefore, yeah, we need to look at really connecting the dots and not feel like, there's only one way of doing it, there is only one future. We had planned things only a certain way and it cannot be done differently. So we really need to find ways to increase the possibilities that we see in the world. And multiple possibilities. It's like when you're wanting to win a lottery ticket, if you just buy one, then you'll have less chances of winning that lottery versus trying to find and buy many lottery tickets. And maybe one or two of them might have a way for you to strike and win that lottery. So I think like some of us know, we've been on a journey to listen to various learners and listen to various people about what do they think about their futures. And when we went and asked this question to young people in Assam, their first response was that Assam is going to become a river or is going to be covered with water, and we are not going to have our schools that will be operational. We are not going to have any way of accessing education. That was one of their concerns. The rivers are going to take over, and that painted a certain bleak picture, saying that Assam may not exist in the way we knew it. And then when we asked them to imagine alternate possibilities to the future that they saw, they came up with different other ideas, that we'll be great at boating. We will really know how to, have boating championships in our own little places, and we would have different interesting ways of growing food in water, because everything was submerged in water. We'll use water for our own food requirements. We'll have a migration advisor who can help us do planned migrations in our own to different parts of the country, given that the way migration is happening today is distress migration in many ways. So we opened up these possibilities, asking learners. They said their housing, which is currently done a certain way, they reimagined the housing, which would be earthquake-proof, waterproof, water-resistant housing models. Or they said that maybe the Assam government would use the flood state to come and witness how beautifully we are managing the floods. And it could become a study of managing what is what seems like a disaster. We'll try to reimagine that to be useful ways to attract people to come to Assam and see what's going on. And therefore, like a lot of you have said, that the climate crisis is real. It is posing some significant threats in terms of mental well-being, livelihood security, land, identities that a lot of young people are facing today and will continue to face. And so these are a few questions that we need to ask ourselves and try to answer over the next 2 days, but over the next decade or so, as to how are we really prepared for climate crisis, how are we really thinking about the future through a collective wisdom rather than our own sort of siloed ways of doing things. And coming to learning, and how is learning going to be in 2045, if we were to really ask that question about what do you see as your preferred learning future in 2045, any thoughts that come into your mind? What do you see your preferred learning in 2045? Any reflections? Yeah, Shakil? Okay. So, okay. So learning would be screenless in 2045. That's a interesting thought. Any others? Yeah? It's going to be a collection of stackable experiences. Great. So that's a thought that we've been thinking. What if the learner was the innovator rather than consumer of content? And if there are different stackable experiences where the learner can access, based on who he or she is, be able to access different kinds of learning materials, mentoring opportunities, growth opportunities, job opportunities, based on maybe the similar metaphor of a UPI equivalent in education. Will that be able to change the way we look at the learner as the innovator, and everything is designed for the learner to be successful, rather than right now we are trying to feed the learner with multiple different pieces of content, or trying to be more dissemination oriented? Can we create more value for the learner? The learner is the value creator, is the one who will change the world and change themselves. And that's the vision for the learner. And therefore, when it comes to AI, should we be asking questions about, are we scared of AI, or is AI meant to unleash more human creativity, more human agency, and being able to really design for that? And that's something we want to talk about over the next few days. And that brings us to the future cone, and that's something that you probably see outside, and you're going to be able to, maybe Shakil will talk a little more about that in terms of the types of futures that we envision, whether they are the possible futures. No one could have predicted or a COVID as a possible future, but it did happen. And similarly, there are preferable, probable, plausible futures, which I won't get into, but I think we'll listen in to what are the cone of possibilities and the future cone. But the really important thing here to ask is, who is standing here? Whose future is it? And that is the question that we want to answer through the different discussions, that there could be multiple futures. There is no one future. And depending on who's standing here, the future will get seen and experienced differently. And we know that sort of this idea of a future does not exist, that it exists in our imagination. No, we don't necessarily think that, yeah, we are here in the future. We are always imagining the future. And I think that's what we need to keep in mind. How do we really sort of open our minds to more imaginations and be able to really look at the multiple futures that might be coexisting and being able to see through those multiple futures. Because the current futures are really borrowed from a lot of dominant social narratives as we know it today. And that is something that we want to break by really opening up the minds to imagination. So we need to shift into giving, because knowing the unknown futures or exploring these futures gives us confidence and agency to act freely. And so really the call is, let's stay with the discomfort. Oftentimes in futures thinking, you want to move quickly to the next thing, but staying with the discomfort, letting that pain sink in, experiencing it, I think is critical from a future thinking perspective. How do we stay in that future that is this uncomfortable? How do we break our assumptions today about what we think is possible, what is not? And how do we gain agency over what we can imagine? And so at Quest, one of the things that we are excited about is the Quest Learning Observatory that we are launching in January 2024, which is really a space for people to think about futures on a continuous basis, to be able to reimagine, to be able to build, to be able to experience, more importantly, that sort of consciousness shift that we all want towards sustainability. And so the Quest Learning Observatory is going to hopefully create that environment, which is a physical environment, and that will help us facilitate our sort of imaginative thinking process. And we went a little crazy with all the experiences that we could imagine at the observatory. So right from sort of sound experiences to maker garages, to community kitchens, to community spaces and permaculture-based design systems to imagine the future of different ideas that we can build together. So this is something that will continue this conversation. It's not ending today, but it's really being able to start us on that journey to be able to continuously build and imagine, so that our imagination of the future can really shape our present, as opposed to feeling like our present shapes our future. So I hope that we'll see a lot of you there and continue this conversation, but hoping that we have a great 2 days. Thank you, and really warm welcome again.
Thank you, Akash, for that wonderful context setting. I think, like for me, one of the things came up when you were sharing was just what are the values which are going to drive our imagination of the future? Are they going to be based in this idea of nurturing, compassion, empathy, or competition, extraction? And I think the other thing, that uncertainty can be beautiful, and can we use it as a source of imagination? So with that, we're going to move ahead with our panel. And I think one question which Akash asked in his session was, whose future is it that we are talking about? So we thought we'll start the conversation hearing from young people how they are imagining their future. So we have a panel which is being moderated by Bhavna, who is a research coordinator at Quest Alliance. And she is going to be interacting with Kaurabi, who has been a teacher in Assam from Majuli. She also uses social media very effectively to capture stories of how climate change and floods are affecting their island. So do look up her YouTube channel as well. We have Rajashri, who is a student in an ITI in Talcher in Odisha, which is a mining district. So she's going to be talking about her experiences. And we have Rohan, who is again an ITI student in Halol from Gujarat. So give it up for them. They've prepared really hard for this and they have traveled a long distance to be here with all of you. So over to you, Bhavna.
Can you hear me now? Thank you, Neha. And आप लोगों का भी थैंक यू कि आप यहाँ आए और हमें अपने लिव्ड एक्सपीरियंसेस बताएंगे आज। तो कोयरो भी आपसे स्टार्ट करते हैं, क्या आप इंट्रोड्यूस करेंगे अपने आप को?
Good morning, everyone. This is me, Korobi, from Majuli, Assam, the biggest river island in the world, and I did my graduation in English. And I'm from Missing tribe, second largest tribe in Assam. So my family mostly depends on agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Koyrobi. Rajashri.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Namaskar. I'm Rajashri from Odisha. Basically, मैं तालचेर से बिलोंग करती हूँ, द कोल कैपिटल ऑफ इंडिया, जिसे कि मतलब हमारा ओडिशा में द सिटी ऑफ ब्लैक डायमंड भी कहा जाता है। और मैंने अपनी 2 इयर्स का ITI कोर्स इन इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स मैकेनिक में कंप्लीट किए और मैंने अपनी BSc भी कंप्लीट की है, ग्रेजुएशन इन केमिस्ट्री। थैंक यू।
थैंक यू राजश्री। रोहन।
हेलो, नमस्कार। मेरा नाम रोहन है। मैं स्मॉल मीडियम टाउन हलोल से बिलोंग करता हूँ और
माइक
हेलो
ऑन।
और मेरा वतन दाहोद जिला है जो पूरा का पूरा आदिवासी पॉकेट है और मैं एक आदिवासी कम्युनिटी से बिलोंग करता हूँ।
थैंक यू रोहन। तो आप लोग इतने डिफरेंट कॉन्टेक्स्ट से आते हैं, इतने डिफरेंट डिस्ट्रिक्ट से आते हैं जहाँ बहुत ज़्यादा डिफरेंट चैलेंजेस होंगे जो यंग पीपल फेस करते होंगे। तो क्या आप हमें बताना चाहेंगे कि जो आज का यूथ है वो क्या चैलेंजेस फेस करता है? राजश्री, अगर हम आपसे पहले पूछें, तालचेर में यंग पीपल क्या चैलेंजेस फेस कर रहे हैं आजकल?
हेलो मैम, हमारे तालचेर में हेलो मैम, बेसिकली हमारे तालचेर में बहुत सारी इंडस्ट्रीज़ है, वहाँ पर कोल माइनिंग होती है, तो इसीलिए वहाँ पर बहुत ज़्यादा इंडस्ट्रीज़ डे बाय डे बढ़ रहा है। तो ज़्यादातर चैलेंजेस हमें उस इंडस्ट्री की वजह से ही हो रही है, जो मतलब कहते हैं ना टेक्नोलॉजी का डेवलपमेंट, और उस हिसाब से जितना सारा मतलब इंडस्ट्रीज़ बढ़ रहे हैं उस हिसाब से ही बहुत सारा चैलेंजेस हमें फेस करना पड़ता है। और जैसे कि मतलब वहाँ पर क्लाइमेट बहुत ख़राब हो रहा है, एयर पोल्यूशन बहुत ज़्यादा है वहाँ पर, वाटर पोल्यूशन भी बहुत ज़्यादा है। उस हिसाब से अगर देखा जाए तो मतलब हेल्थ डिजीज़ बहुत ज़्यादा होती है वहाँ पर बच्चों से लेके ओल्डर्स तक, जहाँ को भी मतलब जिसको भी देखोगे सबका कुछ ना कुछ हेल्थ इश्यूज़ रहता है। और वहाँ पर जो मतलब अभी बहुत ज़्यादा वहाँ पर कैंसर की बीमारी चल रहा है और लंग्स की तो बहुत सारी डिजीज़ेस है, ब्रीदिंग का बहुत प्रॉब्लम हो रहा है। अब नॉर्मली अगर हम देखें तो ओल्डर्स को चश्मा लगती है, लेकिन हमारे वहाँ पर अब बच्चों को भी चश्मा लगने लगा है, इतना ज़्यादा पोल्यूशन है। और वहाँ पर इतने सारे डस्ट है, तो मतलब हम यहाँ पर जनरली देखें तो जब हमें ठंड लगता है तब हम खुद को ढकते हैं, लेकिन हमारे वहाँ पर अब खुद को गर्मी में भी ढकना पड़ता है, इतना ज़्यादा डस्ट है। तो मतलब घर से निकलो तो खुद को ढको, और हमें तो अभी वो क्रीम मेडिसिन ये सब भी कैरी करना पड़ता है। और इस स्ट्रेस की वजह से एक्सीडेंट्स भी बहुत ज़्यादा हो रही है। अब यहाँ से मतलब वहाँ तक मैं देख रही हूँ, मुझे क्लियरली दिख रही है, पर अगर आप वहाँ तालचेर में देखोगे तो ये इतना क्लियर नहीं दिखेगा, इतना ज़्यादा वहाँ पर पोल्यूशन बढ़ रहा है। और
अच्छा।
उसके वजह से मतलब वहाँ पर अब और कोई ऑप्शन भी नहीं बचा है।
मतलब?
वहाँ पर सब जगह इंडस्ट्रीज़ ले रही है,
अच्छा।
वहाँ पर जो तालचेर के लोग हैं वहाँ पर 60% ज़मीन मतलब इंडस्ट्रीज जा रही है, तो वहाँ के जो लोग हैं तो उन्हें मतलब बाहर जाना पड़ेगा रहने के लिए, क्योंकि वो लोग अपनी ज़मीन दे रहे हैं इंडस्ट्रीज़ की वजह से। तो तालचेर के लोग अभी बाहर जा रहे हैं और उन्हें हेल्थ इश्यूज भी बहुत ज़्यादा रह रही है, इसीलिए वो लोग तालचेर छोड़ के बाहर जा रहे हैं।
पर इंडस्ट्रीज़ के आने से कुछ पॉजिटिव भी तो होगा।
हाँ, पॉजिटिव वहाँ पर मतलब तालचेर के बाहर से जो लोग मतलब वहाँ पर एम्प्लॉयमेंट ज़्यादा मतलब रह रहा है, जो कि नॉर्मली बाहर से तालचेर में जाते हैं लोग इंडस्ट्रीज़ में काम करने के लिए, वहाँ पर एम्प्लॉयमेंट अच्छा है।
अच्छा, तो ये जो आपने पोल्यूशन के बारे में बात की, इससे यंग किड्स को और जो लोग पढ़ाई करते हैं उनको क्या चैलेंजेस, उनकी एजुकेशन में कुछ चैलेंजेस हैं क्या?
हाँ मैम, ये चैलेंजेस तो आएगी, क्योंकि जब भी मतलब इतना ज़्यादा पोल्यूशन की वजह से डिजीजेस बढ़ रहे हैं, तो आज किसी का इचिंग हुआ, कल किसी का लॉन्ग्स की प्रॉब्लम, ब्रीदिंग का प्रॉब्लम, बच्चों को मतलब उनका तबीयत ख़राब हो रहा है डे बाय डे, तो उनका पढ़ाई उसमें ड्रॉप हो रहा है, वो कंटिन्यू हो नहीं पा रहा है, तो उनकी पढ़ाई में भी बहुत ज़्यादा मतलब अफेक्टेड कर रहा है वो।
अच्छा, थैंक यू राजश्री, थैंक यू ये शेयर करने के लिए। कोई भी अगर मैं आपसे यही सेम सवाल पूछूं, आप माजुली से आते हैं, आपने बोला ग्रेटेस्ट रिवर आइलैंड, बिगेस्ट रिवर आइलैंड इन द वर्ल्ड, आप मिसिंग ट्राइब से हैं, तो आप क्या कहते हैं कि आपकी कम्युनिटी के लोग और माजुली के यंग लोगों को क्या चैलेंजेस फेस करने पड़ रहे हैं?
तो हमारे वहाँ पे माजुली में तो मेनली जो चैलेंजेस है वो है फ्लड एंड इरोशन, और इसी फ्लड और इरोशन की वजह से हम एजुकेशन में भी बहुत पीछे है, हेल्थ इश्यूज भी है बहुत सारा, कम्युनिकेशन है, अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट प्रॉब्लम्स है। तो मेनली मिसिंग पीपल्स जो है ना, मिसिंग ट्राइब्स के जो लोग हैं वो माइटी ब्रह्मपुत्र और ऐसे नदियों के किनारे मीन्स रहते हैं, तो ज़्यादातर प्रॉब्लम उन्हीं को फेस करना पड़ता है। तो आपका साल में तो 3 महीने के लिए बाढ़ आता जाता रहता है, तो उसमें क्या होता है, लोग जब फ्लड आता है ना तो इरोशन का जो प्रकोप है वो भी बढ़ जाता है, तो उसमें लोग लैंडलेस हो जाते हैं, घर नहीं होते रहने के लिए। सो उनको क्या है, जो गवर्नमेंट रोड साइड है ना मथावरीज में, वहाँ पे उनको शेल्टर लेना पड़ता है, तो बहुत ही पैथेटिक कंडीशन से होकर गुजरना पड़ता है, तो बहुत पैथेटिक कंडीशन है वहाँ पे।
आप ये बोल रहे हो कि एवरी ईयर 3 मंथ्स के
3
लिए
मंथ्स
होता
के
है।
लिए, हाँ।
तो यंग किड्स और जो लोग पढ़ाई करते हैं उनको
हाँ।
क्या चैलेंजेस फेस कर, उनकी एजुकेशन पर क्या इफेक्ट पड़ता है
हाँ।
इसकी वजह से?
तो उस दौरान क्या होता है, तो वो लोग अपने शेल्टर को ढूंढे या खाने को कुछ ढूंढे या पढ़ाई करे, तो ऐसा एनवायरनमेंट होता ही नहीं है वहाँ पे कि यंग लोग पढ़ाई के ऊपर ध्यान दे पाए या कुछ मीन्स स्कूल कंटिन्यू जा पाए, ऐसा हो नहीं पाता है, क्योंकि सब घर भी डूब जाता है और आपका स्कूल वगैरह रास्ता सब डूब जाता है ना। जो हाईलैंड रोड साइड होते हैं वहाँ पे लोग शेल्टर लेते हैं, तो पढ़ाई के नाम पे कुछ भी नहीं होता है उस दौरान।
तो आप भी टीचर रह चुके हैं और आप ट्यूशन्स लेते हैं, तो आप बताएंगे कि फिर यंग लोग एजुकेशन को इस कंडीशन में कैसे देखते हैं, क्या समझते हैं वो एजुकेशन क्या है फिर उनके लिए?
सो एजुकेशन, हमारे वहाँ पे एजुकेशन कंप्लीट एजुकेशन जो होता है वो हो नहीं पाता है, तो आधा में छूट जाता है, अधूरा हो जाता है, तो कुछ का तो 7-8 उसमें ख़त्म एजुकेशन, और किसका ऐसे करके उतना पढ़ नहीं पाते, तो उसके वजह से स्किल डेवलपमेंट नहीं हो पाता, तो अच्छा जॉब भी नहीं मिल पाता, तो फाइनेंशियली बहुत वीक हो जाते हैं लोग, तो ऐसा है कंडीशन।
तो फिर बच्चे करते क्या हैं अगर वो 8th तक ही पढ़ पाते हैं, तो उसके बाद क्या करते हैं फिर वो?
मैम वो लोग बाहर चले जाते हैं कुछ कुछ बड़े जगह पे, जैसे कि आपकी बेंगलुरु, यहाँ पे भी हमारे आसाम से बहुत सारे लोग हैं, कुछ काम वगैरह कर लेते हैं, और मीन्स बाहर नहीं जाने से मीन्स उनका सर्वाइव हो नहीं पाता है, क्योंकि लैंडलेस है ना, अभी इतना इरोशन मीन्स बढ़ जाता है फ्लड के सीजन में, माजुली ख़त्म मीन्स कम होते होते जा रहा है अभी, तो माजुली का जो लैंड है वो एवरी ईयर मीन्स डिक्रीज होता जा रहा है, तो एग्रीकल्चर के ऊपर भी डिपेंड नहीं हो पाते वहाँ के लोग।
अच्छा, थैंक यू कोयरोबी ये शेयर
Thank you,
करने
ma'am.
के लिए। आपने हमें एक रियलिटी बताई है जो शायद यहाँ पे बहुत लोगों को पता भी नहीं होगी। रोहन, आपने बोला कि आप हलौल में काम करते हैं और आप दाऊद से बिलोंग करते हैं, तो आप बताइए कि आपको क्या लगता है जो यंग लोग हैं दाऊद के, उन्हें क्या चैलेंजेस हैं?
चैलेंजेस की बात करें तो मेरा वतन दाहोद जिला है, जहाँ वहाँ पूरा का पूरा आदिवासी पॉकेट जिला है। वहाँ पहले तो शिक्षा की बहुत कमी है, रोजगारी की समस्या है, और हमारे समुदाय के लोगों को और शहरों में जाना पड़ता है वहाँ रोजगारी के लिए। और क्या है, बाहर रोजगारी के लिए जाते हैं तो उनके साथ अन्याय होता है, उनका फ़ायदा उठाया जाता है। ऐसी बहुत सारी प्रॉब्लम है।
वो रोजगारी के लिए कहाँ जाते हैं?
और शहरों में जैसे कि हालोल है और ऐसे अलग अलग शहरों में जाके रोजगारी के लिए जाते हैं।
तो आपने कहा कि उनके साथ अन्याय होता है, किस तरह का अन्याय होता है?
जैसे कि वो क्या है कि 10वीं तक की पढ़ाई करते, कम से कम पढ़े लिखे होते, उनको ज़्यादा समझ नहीं आता है, क्योंकि वो ऐसे बोले तो 10वीं तक की पढ़ाई नॉर्मली होती है, क्योंकि इसके बाद आगे की पढ़ाई बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरी होती है। और वहाँ क्या है कि जो बाहर शहरों में जाते हैं वहाँ उनकी जो पर डे की जो कमाई होती है वो ज़्यादा होती है, लेकिन उनको कम दिया जाता है।
तो ऐसा क्यों है कि वो ज़्यादा पढ़ नहीं पाते? 10th के बाद पढ़ाई क्यों नहीं हो पाती उन लोगों की?
ज़्यादातर हमारे वहाँ इंडस्ट्री आने से क्या है, खेती लायक ज़मीन होती है, वहाँ भी खेती लायक नहीं हो सकती।
अच्छा।
इंडस्ट्री आने से ज़्यादातर अभी आने से क्या है, वो घर पे खेती ही करते हैं, उसके बाद वो बाहर जाते हैं।
अच्छा, तो वो खेती में चले जाते हैं 10th के बाद, आप ये बोल रहे हैं? ओके, थैंक यू रोहन। तो अगर ये कॉन्टेक्स्ट जो आप तीनों ने हमें अभी बताए हैं, जो आपने ये सच्चाई बताई है अपनी डिस्ट्रिक्ट्स की, तो अगर मैं आपसे पूछूं, जैसे अभी आकाश ने हमें फ्यूचर्स के बारे में बात की है, तो अगर मैं आपसे पूछूं 2045 में आपको क्या लगता है कि आपकी डिस्ट्रिक्ट का फ्यूचर कैसा दिखेगा? कोई भी अगर आप आंसर करना चाहें तो।
सो अगर हम 2045 में अगर अपना फ्यूचर देखना चाहें तो फ्यूचर तो बहुत ही ब्राइट हो सकता है, लेकिन मीन्स तभी हो पाएगा, ये पॉसिबल हो पाएगा जब अभी का जो प्रेजेंट का हमारा जो प्रॉब्लम है वहाँ पे, तो वो अगर सॉल्व हो पाता है तभी हमारा फ्यूचर ब्राइट हमें दिख पाएगा। नहीं तो अंधेरा ही अंधेरा है फ्यूचर, क्योंकि माजुली रहेगा ही नहीं तो क्या फ्यूचर होगा? अपना खुद का मीन्स जगह नहीं रहेगा, घर नहीं रहेगा, तो आप सोच सकते हो कैसा होगा हमारा कंडीशन।
कोई ये तो काफ़ी स्कैरी सिचुएशन आप बोल रहे हो, आपको कोई और पॉसिबिलिटी नहीं दिखती?
अच्छा मैम, तो संजय घोष जी से लेके हमारे जो लोकल वहाँ के लोग हैं, उन्होंने बहुत सारे इनिशिएटिव लिए इरोशन को मीन्स प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए, इरोशन को कवर अप करने के लिए। जैसे कि मान लो आपका प्लांटेशन किया और पार्कोपाइन, ऐसे करके बहुत सारे इनिशिएटिव लिया माजुली को सेव करने के लिए इरोशन से, लेकिन वो हो नहीं पाया। तो अभी क्या हो रहा है, तो इसीलिए हमारे वहाँ पे जो यूथ है उनका भविष्य अभी मीन्स अंधेरे से भरा हुआ है। अगर हो पाए, माजुली सेव हो पाता है, तभी हमारा फ्यूचर ब्राइट हो पाएगा मैम। थैंक यू।
अच्छा, तो इस सिचुएशन में फिर आपको क्या लगता है कि जो यंग पीपल है, अगर आप कह रहे हो माजुली बचेगा ही नहीं फ्यूचर में, तो उस टाइम कम्युनिटीज़ और यूथ फिर क्या करेंगे, कहाँ जाएंगे?
दर दर भटकना पड़ेगा, और अलग जगह में अगर जॉब ढूंढना भी चाहे तो उनके पास उतना क्वालिफिकेशन नहीं होता है, क्योंकि हमारे वहाँ पे तो उतना हायर एजुकेशन के लिए हायर इंस्टीट्यूशन नहीं है, तो स्किल डेवलपमेंट भी हो नहीं पाता, अवेयरनेस का भी दिक्कत है। बाहर भी वो एडजस्ट नहीं कर पाएंगे, तो ऐसे है मैम।
अच्छा, थैंक यू कोई, ये
Thank you,
काफ़ी
ma'am।
आपने हमें थोड़ा स्कैरी सिचुएशन बताया है फ्यूचर का। कैसा सोच के कैसा लग रहा है आपको इस बारे में?
अपना घर नहीं होगा, अपना जगह नहीं होगा, वो सोच के तो बहुत ही बुरा लगता है, लेकिन अभी ये पता नहीं क्या होने वाला है।
थैंक यू कोई।
Thank you।
रोहन, अगर आप हमें बताएंगे, आपने बोला कि आपके यहाँ पे दाऊद में लोग ज़्यादा पढ़ नहीं पाते और खेती पे ही डिपेंडेंट रहते हैं, या तो बाहर जाके लेबर का काम करते हैं, तो आपको क्या लगता है 2045 में दाऊद का क्या फ्यूचर होगा?
मैं फ्यूचर की बात करूँ तो हमारा दाऊद का फ्यूचर बहुत ही ख़राब है, क्योंकि 2045 तक इतनी इंडस्ट्रीज बढ़ जाएगी तो खेती लायक जो ज़मीन होगी वो भी धीरे धीरे ख़त्म होने लगेगी। और वहाँ जैसे जैसे इंडस्ट्रीज बढ़ेगी वैसे वैसे टेक्नोलॉजी भी बढ़ रही है, वैसे ऑटोमेशन भी बढ़ रहा है, और ऐसे ऑटोमेशन भी बढ़ रहा है, इस वजह से ज़्यादातर मानव रोजगारी धीरे धीरे ख़त्म होने लगेगी। जैसे जहाँ रोजगारी हमें मिलनी चाहे वहाँ जेसीबी और हिटाई जैसे मशीन भी काम करने लगेंगे, तो फिर धीरे धीरे मानव रोजगारी ऐसे भी ख़त्म होने वाली।
तो आप कह रहे हो कि इंडस्ट्रीज़ बढ़ने से कोई फ़ायदा नहीं होगा, रोज़गारी नहीं मिलेगी।
रोज़गारी धीरे धीरे ख़त्म हो जाएगी।
अच्छा, तो फिर लोग क्या करेंगे, किस तरह से फिर अपना रोज़गार चलाएंगे?
रोज़गारी के लिए उनको अलग अलग शहरों में जाना पड़ेगा। रोज़गारी के लिए उन्हें ज़्यादातर बाहर जाना पड़ेगा, और वहाँ भी मिलेगी नहीं मिलेगी वो तो उनको पता ही नहीं होगा।
ये तो काफ़ी ब्लीक पिक्चर है रोहन, पर थैंक यू शेयर करने के लिए, आपने हमें ये बताया। राजश्री, आप बताएंगे आपको क्या लगता है तालचेर में क्या है, कैसा फ्यूचर आप देखते हैं? आपने बोला इतनी इंडस्ट्रीज़ ऑलरेडी हैं वहाँ, इतना पोल्यूशन हो रहा है और इतना हेल्थ इश्यूज़ भी हैं, तो 2045 में तालचेर का क्या होगा?
मैम 2045 में हमें मतलब तालचेर ही नहीं दिख रही है, मतलब इतना डेंजर सिचुएशन आ रहा है। वैसे वहाँ पर कोल माइनिंग बहुत ज़्यादा होती है, इसलिए वहाँ पर मतलब जो भी सारे कोल है मिट्टी के नीचे वो तो सब निकाल रहे हैं, और कुछ दिन बाद वो कोल भी ख़त्म हो जाएगा, वो परमानेंट के लिए नहीं रहेगा। तो वो सारे कोल जब ख़त्म हो जाएगा तो अभी भी मतलब फील होता है लोगों को, मतलब मिट्टी के नीचे सिर्फ रहते हैं, अब कुछ है बचा ही नहीं है। अगर थोड़ा सा भी मतलब भूकंप आए ना तो मिट्टी मतलब धस जाएगी अंदर, मतलब तालचेर ही नहीं रहेगा, मिट्टी पूरी की पूरी धस जाएगी। और फिर सुना गया है, मतलब जितना मुझे पता है, मैंने सुना है कि अब कुछ साल के अंदर अंदर ये जो माइनिंग का काम है, कोल माइनिंग का काम है, वो 4 गुना या 5 गुना बढ़ जाएगा वहाँ पर। मतलब ऐसे ही अब एयर का पोल्यूशन है, टॉक्सिक गैसेस ऐसे ही प्रेजेंट है पहले से, मतलब NO2 का लेवल बहुत ज़्यादा है वहाँ पर, और फिर अब कार्बन डाइऑक्साइड भी बढ़ने वाली है। तो मतलब ऐसे ही वहाँ पर हमें ब्रीदिंग का प्रॉब्लम हो रही है, और वैसे और भी कुछ गैसेस, टॉक्सिक गैसेस ऐड होने वाले हैं। तो आप सोच सकते हैं क्या हम लोग ब्रीदिंग कैसे करेंगे, जिएंगे कैसे? मतलब हालत ऐसी हो रही है कि वहाँ पर अगर कुछ भी इनिशिएटिव्स लिया गया तो शायद मतलब जो बदतर से बदतर हालत है वो थोड़ी और एक्सटेंड हो सकती है। मतलब ये अभी ख़त्म होना है, 5 मिनट के बाद ख़त्म होना है, अगर कुछ इनिशिएटिव लिया गया तो ये शायद 15 या 20 मिनट तक रह सकता है, उसके बाद ख़त्म होगा। मतलब ऐसा हालत हो चुका है, कुछ भी इनिशिएटिव ले। और वहाँ पर तो मतलब यहाँ पर हम इतनी मतलब जितनी टेम्परेचर यहाँ पर है, हमें यहाँ पर ठंड लगता है, लेकिन वहाँ पर अगर इतनी टेम्परेचर होगा, इतना गर्मी है, कभी कभी तो इतनी मतलब टेम्परेचर हाई होने की वजह से कोल माइनिंग का काम चलता है, अपने आप ही आग लग जाता है। तो
आप जैसे बोल रहे हो कोई इनिशिएटिव लेंगे तो थोड़ा ही बेहतर होगा, बट आपके दिमाग में कोई इनिशिएटिव है जो लेना चाहिए जिससे चीज़ें बेटर हो जाएं तालचेर में?
जी मैम, अगर इनिशिएटिव्स की बात किया जाए तो अभी वहाँ पर वैसे तो काफ़ी सारे टेक्नोलॉजी है जिसकी वजह से अफेक्टेड हो रहे हैं सब। तो वहाँ के जो यूथ है या फिर वहाँ के जो लोग हैं उन्हें थोड़ा अपस्किलिंग होना पड़ेगा, उन्हें थोड़ा और मतलब हमारा फ्यूचर ऐसा है इससे सोच के आगे बढ़ना पड़ेगा, जैसे कि मतलब और ज़्यादा ख़राब ना हो, क्योंकि हमें ही जीना है वहाँ पर वहाँ के मतलब लगता है तो एक दिन सब तालचेर ही छोड़ कर जाना पड़ेगा। अगर ऐसी सिचुएशन है तो आप ही बताएं ना हम कैसे जिए, मतलब वो तालचेर ही नहीं रहेगा, कभी भी घुस सकता है अंदर, और वहाँ पर तो सांस भी नहीं लिया जा रहा है।
तो आपको कोई और पॉसिबिलिटी नहीं लगती तालचेर की? इवन आपने जो अपस्किलिंग की बात की, जो पॉजिटिव इनिशिएटिव्स, उससे
हाँ शायद उससे ये सिचुएशन थोड़ी हैंडल किया जैसे, मतलब जैसे कि ऐसे भी टेक्नोलॉजीज, अब इतने सारे टेक्नोलॉजीज आ रहे हैं तो कुछ ऐसे भी टेक्नोलॉजी आनी चाहिए कि जो कि ये एयर पोल्यूशन जो है उससे कंट्रोल कर सके, या तो फिर जो ये इस डस्ट की वजह से वाटर को जो पोल्यूशन हो रहा है उसे लोग पी रहे, उसे भी कंट्रोल किया जा सके। ऐसे हो रहा है पर इतना ज़्यादा नहीं हो रहा है क्योंकि इंडस्ट्रीज़ का संख्या बहुत ज़्यादा है।
अच्छा,
तो थोड़ा स्ट्रॉन्ग करना पड़ेगा।
थैंक यू राजश्री। कोयरो भी, आपको क्या लगता है कोई ऐसे इनिशिएटिव्स हैं जो हम ले सकते हैं माजुली में आपके हिसाब से, जिससे बेटर हो सकती है, फ्यूचर बेटर हो सकता है?
मैम, अगर माजुली को इरोशन से अगर सेव किया जा सकता है तो बाकियों का इम्प्रूवमेंट करने के लिए या डेवलपमेंट करने के लिए हमारे पास समय रहेगा। लेकिन अगर माजुली ही सेफ नहीं रहेगा तो बाकी सब के बारे में बोलना तो मीनिंगलेस हो जाएगा। तो अगर हो पाए तो माजुली सेफ हो जाए, ये हम आशा करते हैं।
थैंक यू कोयरो भी, थैंक यू राजश्री एंड थैंक यू रोहन, आप यहाँ आए और हमें आपने अपनी रियलिटीज़ बताई, अपने डिस्ट्रिक्ट के बारे में बताया, और जो यंग लोग सोच रहे हैं आजकल, जो उनकी एंग्जाइटीज़ हैं फ्यूचर को लेके, वो बताया। तो मैं आपका तहे दिल से शुक्रिया करना चाहती हूँ.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. I hope we'll be able to use these stories in the next 2 days. But back to you, Neha.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhavna, Kaurabi, Rajashri, and Rohan. I think in the morning we spoke about choices that we want to create for young people. And listening to this conversation, it looks like the choices that young people have right now is between protecting shelter or education, taking care of their health or stepping out for livelihood. Whether to kind of stay back in their hometowns with the sense of safety, security, maybe even dignity, or choose between injustices and kind of moving out from secure spaces as well. And I think the other powerful thing which came out from the panel is that our sort of imagination of the future is so heavily sort of dependent, or our possibility of the future, our opportunities in the future is so heavily dependent on where we are at today, where we are coming from, where I live, what community I'm a part of, and it's clearly not equal for everybody. With that, I'd like to move to the next panel to go a little bit deeper into what are the possibilities of the future. And when we think of it from such a diverse context, is there really any hope? And how do we move towards hope from all the anxiety and concerns that we are hearing? So with that, I'd like to invite Abhay Raj, who's the moderator for this panel. And along with him are Deepika Mogali Shetty, who is from Ek Step Foundation. We have Dr. Indu Murthy, who is from Climate, Environment and Sustainability Center for Study of Science, Technology and Policy. And we have Rohit Adlaka, who is an independent board member and CXO. They all come from diverse fields at the intersection of technology, learning, environment, and climate change, and are kind of going to open up the multiple possibilities in the future that we have. So over to you, Abhay Raj.
Thanks very much, Neha. Good morning, everyone. How are we doing in the room today? Can I do a quick energy check? High, somewhat in the middle, down here. Could we see those hands up or down, depending on, all right. So it looks like the rains have not dampened enthusiasm too much. And thank you to the young friends who shared those stories about lived experiences. Some of it, obviously, perhaps raising a concern, and thank you also to all the organizers for giving us this beautiful opportunity to discuss future literacy. So I'm going to launch straight off into our panel for today, and I think before I say anything else, I want to thank very much Deepika, Rohit, and Indu. You all are, I think, incredibly experienced and wise panel, and it's my privilege and honor to have a chance to moderate this session. I'm quite excited about learning with you, and really looking forward to your responses to these questions. I also want to thank you very much for agreeing to the slightly distinctive format of this panel, which I think will become evident to everyone in the audience very, very quickly. I want to thank you for trusting all 200 of us and agreeing to be open, to be intimate, and I dare say perhaps even being vulnerable as you share your own fears, anxieties, and hopes for very much an uncertain future. I think in the framing of this panel, we've really embraced Akash's invitation to stay with the trouble, to acknowledge the uncertainty and not turn away immediately from what that uncertainty might mean for us in the years ahead, but also in what we do today. So our format for the panel will have 2 rounds of responses from our panelists, and we also hope to have enough opportunity for engagement with you in the audience. So do, if you have a notebook or if you have a strongish memory, just keep your questions or comments in mind. We'll have at least 2 opportunities to pick up, I hope, a handful of questions and invite our panelists to respond. Okay, so without any further ado, let me launch off into my first set of questions. What I would request would be that we perhaps go in the order of first Indu, then Deepika, and finally Rohit for the first set of questions. And I'll request each one of you to perhaps limit your responses to about 4 minutes. These are broad, big questions, but still we hope to really get a lot packed into this panel. So my first set of questions: how would you locate and describe your own work in the context of futures literacy, artificial intelligence, and/or climate change? What is the future utopia that you hope for, and what is the future dystopia that makes you anxious? And finally, if you were a betting person, which future scenario would you bet will be the one that is actually likely to unfold? Over to you, Dr. Indu.
Thank you, Abhay, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to this very exciting discussion. To begin with, I work in the space of climate change, and that's something that definitely is making the future uncertain, as you heard from the speakers in the previous panel. Although they spoke about coal mining, they spoke about marginally erosion and flooding, and of course, the other end, we were also talking about industrialization. So we are looking at development and addressing the issue of climate change in tandem. Now, one cannot go without the other, because you're practically going to be derailing development if you do not address the larger issue of climate change. And there is enough evidence that we see around us, as we heard from our previous speakers as well. What do we do? What do I do in my work in this particular space is I work with a team of about 25 people who look at 3 different pillars of looking at this problem. One is what we call as climate mitigation, which is how do you address or how do you mitigate the emissions? How do you look at various sectors? How do you decarbonize them? But at the same time, the unique space where we work is that we are looking at how do you ensure the sustainable development goals, and without compromising on those, how do you still achieve a low carbon future? So those are the questions that we are asking in that space. But we also recognize that, mitigation, it's slow, it's subject to global collaboration, global, cooperation, and then there is funding required and a whole lot of things, and there is technological innovations which are still emerging. There's a lot happening, but there's a lot more that still needs to happen. So given that, we completely kind of recognize and realize that adaptation is a must. You cannot do without it. When I say adaptation, it's about coping with some inevitable changes, even if you think of an imaginary world where all the problems are addressed. Still, there is something called committed climate change, because there's a lot of gases that's already been emitted into the atmosphere, and the warming will continue to happen for a few decades, even if we stop everything today. So that's another space. So where we are trying to look at how do you kind of make the systems resilient or stronger, so that they're able to cope with these unexpected, unpredictable changes that we are looking at. We're also looking at how do you kind of increase the resilience or adaptive capacities of communities who are dependent on many of the climate-sensitive sectors. We heard about agriculture. It is a climate-sensitive sector. Fisheries, we have a long coastline, that's a climate sensitive sector as well, and a whole bunch of others. So that's another. And the third pillar is to do with sustainability. We are looking at circular economy and related issues in specific areas. This is just emerging within C-STEP, which is the organization I represent. Now, coming to the dystopian future, I think I'm just going to talk about the gray scenario first, because we've already heard a lot, and I'm just going to pick threads from there. So yes, there is a lot of resource extraction that's happening. There's a lot of resource that's being depleted over time. And over and above that, you have this climate, which is exacerbating the existing issues, right? It's not that this world isn't without issues. We've had issues, be it water availability, water quality, be it soil quality, or a whole bunch of other things, right? Now, or equity issues as well. Now, what's happening is that under a climate scenario, the kind of changes are going to be much more stronger. They're going to be much more abrupt. They're going to be compounded. So, which means we are looking at more resource depletion. We are looking at biodiversity being lost, which means probably, I mean, one classic example is the pollinators, the bee populations disappearing from the face of the earth, which means you're not going to have food production. So what are we going to eat, right? I mean, this is, although it sounds dystopian, I've actually seen it in a limited way in the Western Ghats where I worked. There was a time when people were, they were cultivating vanilla. Vanilla is interesting because the male and the female plant are separate. So there needs to be pollination that has to happen, and which means you need a pollinator, a third party to do the pollination. Now, bees are the ones that do. Over a specific period of time, the farmers, I could see, I was working in the forest adjoining these fields, and what I saw is that the farmers are going with bees in bee boxes, flower to flower, pollinating. That was for that specific area. Even in the Himalayan region, people have recorded such instances. So we are seeing small incidences here and there. But then this could become a larger problem, which means we are looking at shortage of water, we are looking at shortage of food as well, which translates to conflicts, which also translates to economic disruptions. So it seems pretty much scary, as it was discussed in the previous panel also. But I'm an optimist. I believe in a better tomorrow as I go to sleep every evening, every night. So obviously, I see opportunity in every problem. Now, where there is a problem, there are definitely ways. I mean, we humans have created the problem. So obviously, which better person, which other being can come out with a solution? We can come out with solutions. We can address the problem. Now, how do we do it? Is through looking at, first and foremost, acknowledging that, yes, the system, it's an inequitable system that we are living in. We are also looking at resources that are depleting, which means to say, let's pause and then try and see how do we efficiently use the resources, how do we kind of increase certain resources. When I say increase, I'm talking about increasing forests, for instance. Planting trees, plantations, it's good for decreasing the heat also. We have this microenvironment that's created. It's definitely good for the climate because you're creating what we call as carbon sinks, basic school photosynthesis, right? That's the only process which captures carbon dioxide. So now, that's one way. The other is, of course, research, technological innovation, which is happening. There's a lot that's happening. I mean, who thought LED bulbs would be there in every single house these days, a few years back? Solar was not really a reality. We are also looking at electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles now today. So there is hope, and there are ways in which these can be addressed, but for which behavioral change, I would think, is the most important, which is about me, which is about every one of us in this particular room. So I think I'm going to pause here and then leave you with the thought that, yes, today seems bleak, but there are also some light in different paths. We'll have to find ways to bring them all together to solve the current problem, but at the same time, remember that the future that we are looking at is not the same as what we are in today. So make it resilient, make it flexible. It includes ourselves, it includes the resources that we use, and in the way we manage resources.
Thanks so much, Dr. Indu. And I think that image of a farmer walking around a field with a bee box to pollinate each vanilla plant is going to stay with me for a long time. That's really what we were looking for when we were trying to invoke imaginations of a utopian and dystopian future. May I please invite Deepika to go next? Over to you.
Okay, now better? All right. I work in education. I work in education technology. I think about how people learn. That's what we do at Step. And I'm going to use my 4 minutes in this way. I'm going to tell 2 stories. When Abhay set up this panel, his intent, at least I think his intent was to enable triggering of imaginations by painting 2 different scenarios of an idea. So I'm going to take a shot at it, right? Ree is a girl, imaginary. She lives in a world where she has to wake up in the morning, and when she wakes up in the morning, the day is set for her. She is told whether she can go out or not, depending on the level of pollution in the air. Her day is fixed based on somebody's predetermined ability, somebody's predetermined standard of her ability of what she can do and what she can't do. She needs to get to a certain place at a certain time, and that is the life of Ree is the life of every child who lives in this world. That you have to accomplish a certain standard of learning at a certain time. By the time you're 10 years old, you're supposed to have finished a list of 20 things. By the time you're 15 years old, you're supposed to have finished a list of 150 things. And by the time you're 18 years old, you should have been this person who can go into the world, stand on your own, and do your own things in the way that has already been predetermined for you. All of this in her life is based on a range of factors which are not in her control. Food she eats, the air she breathes, the water she drinks, and what she studies. Whether she likes it or not, she has to do it because it has been determined that that is her destiny. That is her role. And that is a job she has to do. There is a job determined for her based on some predetermined ability. She has no ability to solve further problems in her environment if she even is able to think about it. I started with this version of it. How many of you feel like you're partly living this? Hands up in the audience. How many of you feel like you're partly living this? Hesitantly, a few. I also want to tell another story, and this is something in the context of, I have 2 teenage daughters. My 14-year-old the other day was doing some assignment for school, writing an essay. And to do with how the topic, the debate question was that human beings will be able to save the earth. Her response was the earth will be saved with or without human beings. Because the earth is a resilient feature. It has over time evolved into many, many different things. We happen to think we have control over this. The reason I tell this story is this. In the context of learning and education, we live in a world which has, to take the point that Akash was making, separated us from our reality and lived environments. That is the dystopia we are practically living in right now. So what does education look like? It looks like very different futures for different people depending on where you began your journey. But you're supposed to all reach the same endpoint at the same time. And then build life from that endpoint at the same time, almost as if the future was a point in time. The fact really is, it is futures. And my fear, if I may put it on the table, with respect to AI and technology and all of which I live and work with on a daily basis, I have to admit, is if we use our current muscle for learning and thinking and education and aspirations in the way that we've determined it currently, and translate that into how the technology is supposed to behave for us, then my fear is that we will hasten the pace of separation and disengagement. I will not know how to grow my own food because I will depend on other people to provide it for me. I will not know how to have a clean environment because I'm disconnected from it. Somebody else is going to determine what I learn and how I engage with it. I will have no agency. The lack of agency in an fast-paced, AI-induced technology world scares the bejeebies out of me. Inequity can just multiply in ways because the haves will be haves and the have-nots will be have-nots. And Ree's life will be the life of Key and Ka and everyone else in very many different places depending on where they started out in the world. So let me paint the other picture. Ka lives in a world where words like differently abled and disability does not exist. Can we imagine a world like that? Where your ability, a child is born into the world where inherently we accept that every child is capable and deserves the brightest future that they can and wish to craft for themselves. And the aspiration in that world is to learn to live together. The aspiration is different in that world. Not getting to some place at the same time. Aspiration could be that I know a certain language and I want to learn things in that language in a different way. Can AI or some kind of technology enable me to do that? It should be able to. You move at your pace of learning, no matter what your situation is. As long as you're able to do a few basic things. And you can get to those basics at different paces. There is no on the spectrum, there is no off the spectrum, there is no, everyone is accepted for who they are. And you have access, which is equitable, and technology can enable that. Your ability to be assessed could be based on your ability to be expressing yourself. Assuming you are doing a test in math and you want to demonstrate it with something and that's your choice of being assessed versus somebody who wants to write it on something and somebody who wants to do it in some other way. Imagine having that option and possibility. So that's the future where technology can liberate, give back agency, and enable a range of possibilities. Where the human is in control and not the technology.
Thanks very much, Deepika, and apologies, I cut the second story short a bit. We are going to hopefully have a chance to come back to that, the second level of colors that story began to bring out for us. Over to you, Rohit.
Thanks, and an absolute pleasure to be with all of you. And I'll start, I thought this was a warm-up question, so I'll start with a little more macro view of world and reality. And I'll try and stick to 4 minutes. So first is, all of us know that we live in what we call a VUCA world. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And our ability to predict the future has not been great especially if I look at the recent past in terms of what transformations, what disruptions, what blitzkriegs have happened all around. And I'll take you a summary through the last few decades and then get down to what the future potentially looks like. So in the 1990s, some of us who are still alive in this generation, we saw what we call the World Wide Web. We saw the internet revolution, and we had everything available on our fingertips through a desktop, laptop. Mobile phones are not very prevalent. We then, of course, went to the 2000s, where something called broadband internet came. Mobile phones proliferated, cloud computing came in. And then our favorite of 2010s, where it was social media, it was all about collaboration. It is all about virtual meetings. And then, of course, the biggest decade of disruption, the decade that we live in, where the physical world, the virtual world, and the biological worlds, all three of them have come together. So we've seen that workplaces, we've talked about literacy, we've talked about future of work, has changed dramatically. And workplaces are no longer drudgery. They're more in terms of experience centers, where you can experience collaboration, experience trust, and make it personal. We've seen the AI revolution, where humans and machines are working together. So Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator series, if you've seen, has actually become a reality where humans and machines are coexisting. So creativity, leadership, soft skills from humans, and speed and scalability from machines. We're also moving into people having multiple careers, and this is not moonlighting, multiple careers at the same time, and what we call the gig economy, where the same person is multi-skilled and is able to handle multiple roles at the same time. And the last, of course, is sustainability, diversity, equity, inclusion, work-life balance is what we've been hearing. Seeing this recent past, I would say that all of us can create a unique future, which is an individual future for each one of us, and of course a collective positive future for all of us. And going back to what came on a slide of the 4 Ps in terms what's possible, what's plausible, what's probable, and what's preferable. And I think all of it can be unique for every human, for every individual that is there on the planet. I'm not talking about a utopia, I'm not talking about a dystopia, but I'll give you a sneak preview of, based on the past and where we are right now. And if you're familiar with Kung Fu Panda, where Master Oogway actually tells him, saying that the past is history, the future is a mystery, right now is a gift, and that's why we call it a present. So while we focus on the past, we focus on the future, and that's what this panel is all about. I think our focus should be right here, right now, what impact we can make this very moment. But having said that, I'll divide the answer into 3 parts: business, technology, and society, and that's how we broadly lived as a generation and as human beings. So in the near future, I see that in business, everyone will become what we call digital. Everyone will become what we call reimagining their business model, and experiences is what people will focus on. Human experiences, customer experiences, employee experiences, partner experiences. The second big thing is sustainability, which all of us have talked about, which is all about being sustainable, being adaptable, looking at sustainable and circular economy, and ESG reporting, which again, a lot of us would be familiar with, is going to become mainstay. And of course, the last business trend is all about the geopolitical situation, and we've seen so many conflicts happening, including what's happening in Israel in the last 3 to 4 days. This multipolar world will disrupt supply chains, will disrupt polarization, and 8 billion people, which potentially will go to 10 billion in 2045, will become one macroorganism, having its own conflicts, but also becoming more in unity, and so-called boundaries of countries and regions will all disappear. On the technology side, we're looking at AI in autonomous cars, in healthcare, in education. That disruption, especially generative AI, will continue. In technology, renewable energy is going to become big. So right now, wind and solar is a very small fraction of the overall energy production. And the last, of course, is space, especially after Chandrayaan and Aditya, which has made India very, very proud. Space exploration and potential people inhabiting Mars and even, it's not the sun yet, but even the moon is going to become a reality. On the societal side, we're going to see a massive challenge with longer lifespans, which is great, healthy living, great. But we have a very, very aging population, and we've already seen that in parts of the world. And through this aging population, you're going to see a big impact on healthcare, pension systems, and all the surrounding ecosystems. Because of disruption in society, we're going to see a massive change in education. Personalization, individualized, with no borders in terms of who's teaching us, because everyone is each other's guru. That's a YouTube model of education that I see, where everyone is a producer of knowledge, everyone is a consumer of knowledge. You get the model together through a YouTube platform, and you could learn from anywhere, anytime. And the last disruption, of course, in society is, we talk about AI, and since all of us are becoming more digital virtual beings, the physical reality that we have sitting in front of you, you're going to have challenges in terms of AI ethics, AI data, personalization, and you trying to separate yourself from the physical world to your biological world and your virtual world. So that's a future that I envisage. Nothing utopian, nothing dystopian, it's just a perspective. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rohit. And I think that really brings the first round of responses to a nice, expansive close. We've heard a lot of possible directions that the future might take. You know, there is committed climate impacts that we will have to deal with. There are opportunities arising from the problems. One can get into the internal space and really imagine, as Deepika invited us to, agency or no agency, or the possibility of a world where there is no stigma or negativity attached to difference, right? So, and I think Rohit's comments are hopefully fresh in your mind, where we really have volatility and uncertainty playing out, but all kinds of exciting opportunity just around the cusp as well. So I'm watching the clock here. We are slowly but surely ticking into our second half and the end of time as well. And I'd like to invite a few quick reactions from members in the audience. These could be questions or comments. My only requirement is that they are quickly delivered, so they are brief, and that will allow our panelists to perhaps fold these in or respond to them in the second set of responses. So I hope there are some mics around. If you'd like to just ask a question or make a comment, if you could raise your hand, I could perhaps call on you and direct a mic towards you. Anyone who'd like to go? I see one hand here, help me. I see one hand there. Yeah, so someone with a mic who can go here. You could just stand up perhaps, or grab this mic from here. Yeah, one sec, I'll give you this one. Just say your name if you don't mind.
Sure. Hey, good morning, everyone. I hope it's still morning. This is Mayfreen, and I'm representing an indigenous rights-based organization which is based in Meghalaya. It's called Grassroot. It's not a question, rather maybe it's a throwaway perspective that I would also want to share, like Rohit. This is a perspective that maybe we are reimagining the future too much and not looking back at the wisdom that we've had. The reason why climate change happened is because I'm very touched with the impact of climate change. So what was shared on Majuli, what was shared on the coal mining by our young people in the previous panel, was that we have abused tremendously the earth that has given us life, the nature that have given us a source of livelihood, the nature that have given us food where we are right now. And if I were to look into the future, yes, realistically bleak, but imaginatively hopeful, if we look back again at the cultural indigenous wisdom that we have towards nature, where we strive, we still are part of that very nature, where nature is God. How about looking at that future too? That's one. Number two is if we dare, I would say, if we have the audacity to reimagine that future.
May I request a quick closure to the second point because we are really short of time. Thanks.
Sure. So if we have the audacity and the dare, the fearlessness to reimagine that future, do we dare to bring back our children to the wisdom that we've had so far? Where probably we'll not talk about the Majuli flood, probably we'll not talk about the Black Diamond, probably we'll not talk about food insecurity that we have right now. So I'm requesting, or rather, maybe I'm just putting my point forward, if we dare to reimagine the wisdom that we've had and the past that we've had, and how we can mitigate climate change, how we can mitigate job scarcity as well. Just in a nutshell. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for bringing in that voice. I'll just grab that mic in a sec. I think we have a friend here.
Yeah, hi. My name is Vijay Rao. I'm part of the Quest alumni. I have a question regarding sort of trends, as we were discussing. Rohit, you mentioned starting with the 1990s. I remember back then a lot of optimism, this idea of the end of history. We were all going to be collaborative. We were one big global family. And not to bring politics too much into it, but one of the trends that at least I've seen in the last 30 years is this epic kind of reversal to tribalism, almost a sort of 1930s-esque kind of like this, the revenge of an old kind of societal ordering where othering and creating, an us versus them dynamic. It's not just in India, it's not just in Europe, it's not just in the US, it's all over the world. It's being manifested itself in various different ways, politically, in society, etc. Now, given the problems we're talking about, upskilling young people and for learning, dealing with AI and technology, dealing with environmental sustainability, these are huge questions that require massive global collaboration. Can you just speak to, in the second half of this panel, this idea of this kind of breakdown of society and this going back to tribal sort of corners and how that might impact the sort of dystopian side of things when it comes to addressing these problems, and perhaps what we can discuss over the course of the next day and a half is maybe how we can break those sort of tribalistic tendencies to bring people together to try and work towards solution-oriented thinking so that we can go towards that utopia that you guys have been talking about. So that's my question, a little long-winded, sorry about that.
Not at all. Thank you so much. And I think that's, I'm sorry, we'll probably come back to the next set of comments and responses after the panelists come back, just to make sure that we have two structured rounds of responses. So I think the question has been posed by both of the interlocutors, and I'll just add my own question to that. And this time we'll perhaps go in the order of Deepika, Rohit, and Indu. You're also watching that clock there, so maybe you might have a little less than 4 minutes, and I hope the organizers will give us all the way till 11:30 or 11:35 to wrap this up. So the sharply posed question, going for the jugular, if you wish, is what is the one most important thing that we should do for futures literacy in India, according to you, to realize this utopia that or utopias that we imagine are possible? And just opening up the window to the personal once again, I'm curious if there's something that you are considering in your own work or in your professional life, a hero or heroine's journey, if you wish, that you're contemplating embarking on, which you might be willing to share with all of us. Because I think it's clear that everybody is treating the future as uncertain, so it would help for us to know what are you thinking of as very, very important and significant. And of course, if there are values that come up as key, we would love to hear those values. We saw that Neha also identified that as an important element of the first half of this day. So maybe Deepika goes first.
One thing he says, and asks a very long question. All right, I'm just going to try and keep this mindful of time. There are too many, but if I had to really, really pick, I would say at a very core level for me in the context of my work, which is education, learning, and in the work that I have done before, it's been justice and access. Equitable access. And equitable access in its widest form to access to what is a big question, and access to many different things. Access to the ability to learn in the way I need to learn, right? Access to the ability to pursue a future that I think it is, that the earth needs or we need to coexist in a sustainable way. And I want to take this opportunity also to say one more thing, which is that I do really, really think that we have to relook at this idea of aspiration that exists and perhaps create a future aspiration for a much more, to the point that you were making, a much more hopeful, cohabiting, collaborative future. We're seeing it happen in different pockets, and we are seeing it happen in beautiful, beautiful ways, but that doesn't get the kind of attention that one needs, that this needs. The role of technology, particularly in the learning space, is to unlock. Open it up so that you can learn what you want, access what you need, and grow in the way that you need. But you have to shift the aspiration, because otherwise what you learn is going to go towards what we have been doing so far. So, yeah.
Since my work is very, very varied, I'll cover 3 short perspectives. The first impact that we can make is on education. And like I briefly talked about, that classrooms and physical teachers and students get together will evolve very, very dramatically. And the way I see education, largely driven by purpose and of course a lot of technology, will be that you will very quickly move into a virtual classroom, a YouTube-based educational model where all 8 billion people can potentially become gurus for each other and they can learn from each other, and there'll be massive platforms. Your education will be individualized based on your capability, based on your skills, based on what upskilling is required. And teachers will become multifaceted. They'll become analysts, curriculum setters, problem solvers, content providers, and they'll also bring students of multiple ages, multiple backgrounds all together. And the revolution has already started. IIT Kharagpur, one of the premier technology institutes, has already started digitizing books, if you've seen. So in Indian counting terms, 4 crores 60 lakh books have already been digitized by IIT Kharagpur. So it's now available, I think, free of cost, most of it, to anyone across the planet. India has launched what we call Digital India mission. Again, in Indian terms, 1.12 lakh crores has been earmarked to skill 30 million people on digital skills. That's 3 crore people. So massive change in education, massive change in skilling, thanks to initiatives and technology, and of course the government will, which is happening. I'll quickly switch over to the second topic, which is AI. Everyone's favorite, especially from November last year when ChatGPT came into play. And people are talking about technology, generative AI, large language models. And I firmly believe that Bharat, India, multiple names which are being discussed, can actually have a foundational model of its own. And why is it very important? Because of the rich history of this country, we talk about equity and inclusion. So it's multilingual, multicultural, people of diverse backgrounds. It's very, very collaborative. In India, the working culture, so you can get academicians, you can get government, you can get enterprises together. And then, of course, India is very, very sustainable throughout history. Just a number for any conversation that you do with AI, and you keep asking multiple questions, whether you do a Google search or a ChatGPT, one conversation costs you 20 bottles of water, equivalent of water required to cool your data center to provide that technology. And since India has been extremely, extremely sustainable, at least in the historical past, getting to its feet now, the whole idea about a foundational model of technology and AI which is sustainable is the third thing I would suggest from our side. So the first was education, the second was technology and AI. The third is about sustainability. And since I work on water sustainability very closely, I'll just share my perspective on that. By the end of this decade, which is 2030, demand for water, especially drinking water, will outstrip supply by 40%. And the money required to rectify the situation is going to be $470 billion annually. That's roughly more than $6 trillion by end of this decade. But we can take baby steps. The future is still positive. So if you look at the European Space Agency, ESA, they're building an exact replica, digital replica of Mother Earth. And they call it Destiny, D-E-S-T-I-N-E. Destiny is nothing but a replica of Earth, the physical Earth, the atmosphere, the oceans, the rivers, and they're going to simulate any kind of climate changes that can potentially happen and any kind of mass extinction / mass movement of people, because like talked about, moving from rural areas to urban areas where it's not livable anymore. If you look at agriculture, 70% of water is drawn by agriculture, 42% of it goes waste. Technology is now helping in agriculture in terms of better crop management and better water utilization. And in homes, the last point, US, the biggest economy in terms of GDP, they waste 7 billion gallons, that's more than 4 liters of water, 7 billion gallons of water a day. So technology can actually help you in plugging leaks, looking at your consumption, and helping you being more sustainable and more adaptable. So in a summary, I would say, future is positive. You have to be positive to make a better future for all of us. Thank you.
To me, the core is learning to unlearn. I think that's the most important when we are looking into the future, because we have to start thinking out of the box when we are looking at futures that are not going to be the same, right? So which is why, to me, that's the key thing that's very, very important, and for which I think our education systems have to start actually inculcating the way to think in that manner. I like the idea of Deepika, saying, you set the pace, you decide what needs to be done. But at the same time, what drives them to think is, you're looking at a solution which is not a tunneled vision, which is not short term. Yes, you do get some short term, but you also are thinking about what it means in the medium and the long term. So I think that thought process gets inculcated only if you are taught, or rather taken in the path which helps you to think in that particular manner. And with that, like one of the audience actually commented, that was also one of the key things that I wanted to bring in. Knowledge, traditional knowledge. Let's just not think that we have to create everything on our own. There's a lot that's already up there. We really need to learn to tap the knowledge, scalable. That's the key thing here. How do you scale it? Now, those are the key questions that we need to be asking, rather than trying to see, okay, what is it that is new that I can offer to this problem? At the bottom of all of this, the key thing is aspiration. Again, I'm drawing from her, but that's one of the key things that we do integrate into all the modeling work that we do at C-STEP. Now, I talked about SDGs. What I miss saying at that time is that the SDGs, we do not follow the global benchmarks. What we've tried to define is looking at the resource use, what is the resource availability. We've tried to look at India-specific benchmarks through extensive stakeholder consultations, literature review, and so on and so forth. So I think redefining aspirations is the key. That's very, very important if we are really looking at a positive future. Core values that need to be there, topmost is empathy. Second is responsibility. Third is to look at collaboration, where you're not really looking at your own benefit, your wins, but looking at win for the community or win for the specific resource that we are dependent on, or how do you make it sustain for ourselves, for the next generation, and the more generations to come.
Thank you so much. And I think lots and lots of food for thought in that set of responses. Transformation came up to me, even though the panelists didn't use that word, right? Transformative access, transformative trends, redefining priorities, rethinking aspirations. I've received a sign that we have a few extra minutes, and I know someone there had the hand up. Are you still here with your comment? Would you like to very quickly make a comment? And then I'm going to turn it over to the panelists for a 1-minute closing as well. Yes, you caught my eye, so.
Good morning, and thank you, panelists, for the food for thought. My quick question was, how are we looking at learning and education in the future? Is it a right product or service or a spectrum of that? And within that, how do you locate the role of the government, given that it still is the deliverer of a lot of these products, change, welfare? Where do you see, education and learning within that?
Thanks. What's your name as well?
My name is Devaki. I'm representing Indus Action.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Devaki. One last comment question. Yes, I see this hand go up first. Please. Would you just pass it to me?
Good morning, everyone. This is Rukmini from Breakthrough. We really do engage with the question of gender transformative education system. So when we talk about imagining future for the young people, and when we talk about lots of utopia and dystopia, what kind of utopia and dystopia you people see so far as gender and different other intersectional identities are concerned? That it would be good to bring that question into the table. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't think we can take more interventions, though I did see more hands up. Apologies to those who I couldn't get to. I'll invite you to try and find the panelists maybe over tea or just bring in your comment into a subsequent section. I think I can just request a panelist very, very briefly, maybe a minute or so, in the order of Rohit first, Indu, and then last words to Deepika with the closing thoughts or anything you want to pick up. So, Rohit, over to you first.
Thank you. I'll try and answer quickly, but in two parts. सबसे पहले मैं जो हमारे दोस्त आए थे यहाँ स्टेज पर उनसे कहना चाहूँगा कि आपने अपनी चुनौतियों के बारे हमें बताया, बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया, उसका आभास कराया, उसका परिचय कराया। लेकिन मैं एक बात कहूँगा कि चाहे कुछ भी आपके बाहरी ज़िंदगी में हो रहा हो, आपका जो परिस्थिति चाहे कितनी भी चुनौतियाँ हों, प्लीज़ कीप अ पॉजिटिव माइंडसेट। सकारात्मक रूप से सोचें और जितना आप सकारात्मक होंगे, जितनी भी चुनौतियाँ होंगी, आप उनको सरपास और उनको आप आगे बढ़ पाएंगे। अगर आपके सामने ये अनुभव आप कर रहे हैं, सॉल्यूशंस जो हैं वो भी आपके पास ही हैं। अगर आप सिर्फ अपने मन और दिल को टटोलें कि ऐसा क्या हो सकता है, और उसको इंग्लिश में बोलते हैं आउटलैंडिश, चाहे कितना भी आप सोचें कि ये पॉसिबल नहीं है, आप फिर भी उनको अपने सामने रखिए और अपना दृढ़ निश्चय और अपने आप को मजबूत कीजिए। आपका जो बाहरी परिस्थितियाँ हैं वो खुद ब खुद सकारात्मक होने लग जाएंगी। ये मैं आपको कहना चाहूँगा। ऑन माई साइड आई वुड से दैट इफ़ यू हैव नॉट रेड द भगवद गीता, प्लीज़ डू, एंड डोंट ट्रीट इट लाइक अ रिलीजियस बुक, प्लीज़ ट्रीट इट लाइक अ guide to life, in Hindi as we say kunji. And there are three basic things which have been talked about, the principles of life. One is all about knowledge. We call it gyan. Please make sure that you're always learning, always upskilling, always upgrading yourself, because the disruptive transformation pace at which we're moving, within a few weeks you can become outdated. The second is all about experience through work, which is karma. So try and experience as much as you do. Like in school, we used to say theory and practical. Theory bhi karo, practical bhi karo, ताकि everything that you learn is there as an experience. And the last is connectedness. Whatever we do, we should do it together through what we call consciousness or bhakti. So make sure we don't treat ourselves different from Mother Earth. We don't treat ourselves different from anyone in this audience. We consider ourselves one. Because as people say, all humans are connected biologically, connected to the earth chemically, and connected to this universe atomically. So please stay connected and make sure you follow these three principles of life like I follow. Thank you.
I think what I would want to leave you with is that remember that the future is not something that we enter. It is something, we create or we actually invent. And it belongs to those who prepare for it, today. So which is what resilience is all about, even in the climate change circles that I talk about. And the vast possibilities of our great future will become realities only when we make ourselves responsible for that future. Let's always remember that the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams, and remember, whether you think of the future or not, it comes soon enough.
I have really no advice to give, truly. Because no matter what I think the future is, your vision of yours is going to be different from mine. Right? So I will take this opportunity to try and answer one of the questions that was set up. Is education a right? It is. Is it on the spectrum as far as the service is concerned from the government and whatever? But I will also say, human beings are predisposed to learning. The question of rights and duties, all of that are human constructs that are enabled by systems that we have created to put some responsibility on the people who have the power. So here's what I think we should be doing as a country particularly. The infrastructure for learning, digital or otherwise, should be the responsibility of the ones with power. It's the job of government to enable it. But सीखने की आज़ादी, the freedom to learn, should be all of ours. And if we can make that happen by leveraging the infrastructure provided by government, private, whoever is able to provide it, in the way that you can exercise your सीखने की आज़ादी, I would say that's what we should aspire for, because that's what is going to prepare for whatever imagined future each one of us in this room is going to have. The future that you are imagining of inclusion, or the future of any of us are imagining for all of ourselves. And lastly, I would say, children are predisposed to engaging with the world, perhaps with the most amount of purity and curiosity that somehow we all seem to have lost along the way. So perhaps get in touch with the child within you. That may sustain all of us in the end.
What a beautiful note. Thank you. We are at the end of time. Thank you, wonderful audience and participants across the room for being here and giving us your full energy and presence. Let's indeed dream this future we imagine possible into existence. We are the ones we have been waiting for, as I like to believe. And thank you once again to all of the organizers for the opportunity. One final round of applause for our participants.
Separation, but how at the same time everything is also so interconnected. Right from the example of the bee to how that impacts the food we are able to get. I think in that interconnectedness, the idea of how more global collaborations are also needed while we are still kind of grappling with the idea of othering as well. And I think that also connects with what came up as a question, that are we really going back to the past as well and learning from the wisdom that we have? But at the same time, we also have tendencies of othering in the past. So what from the past do we want to take with us as we are thinking about the future as well? And I think the third thing, that what is our vision of a preferred future? Maybe there were some glimmers that kind of emerged of the kind of future that we want, which is definitely very strongly rooted in the idea of individual agency, social justice, and equity. But at the same time, how do we shift systems and structures to enable this individual agency and really drive shifts in the aspirations around what we value? And that kind of leaves me with a question of what is actually holding us back from daring to act and to be audacious if we know what is the preferred future we want. And maybe to open up that question a little bit more, I'd invite Shakil. How does futures literacy and futures thinking fit in all of this? Shakil has come all the way from Bangladesh. He calls himself a futurist. He's the founder of an organization called Ridiculous Futures. He also heads the EdTech Hub in Bangladesh and works very, very closely with the government there in integrating futures literacy for young learners as well. So over to you, Shakil.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Beautiful. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Like a good class, isn't it? Okay. So, in the spirit of tapping into our own child, let me start with a question. And take out your, if you have a pen and a paper or your mobile phone, feel free to type in whatever medium, or you can type in your mind as well. Like, write down any ridiculous statement that you would like to be true about the future of your country, your planet, or education in the year 2050. Just one statement. So for example, when Akash was speaking, I said the future of education will be screenless. And to some, that might sound ridiculous. But whatever you think. So any ridiculous statement, just take 30 seconds, 40 seconds. And if anyone wants to share, you can raise up your hand. Yeah, a half hand. Oh, yeah, over here.
I think my name is Mustafa. I think the future of in 2050 should be the power of one.
The power of one.
That means each person manufactures, creates a future, and multiplication, scaling, is not by a large scale, but each person having power of carrying that out.
Oh, thank
so
you.
That's the power of one.
Thank you. Another one? Yeah, over here. It was a half hand to a full hand. Yeah, okay.
Framed it now. I think for me, what I often think about is that probably we'll go back to barter system, and all the work in this world will be done by the bots, and we'll probably just be building bots. Okay. And then human beings will largely be just like chilling in.
So from the 2000 rupee gone, all the rupees will be gone.
Yeah, because that'll reduce your problem of climate change and everything if human beings are like really not like, roaming around too much but just like chilling.
Back to the barter system. And just one last one. At the back.
Yeah, hi. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for education, the most ridiculous thing I keep thinking, and I've been thinking for a while, is we don't need no education. Like, can we have a system where people just learn by themselves what they have to learn, and we don't put effort to educate? I mean, we don't need education.
Okay, so Ivan Illich will be your friend in de-schooling society, yeah? Okay, so I think let's hope to have more ridiculous conversations for the rest of the time. But the reason why I mentioned this is that there's a futurist called Jim Dater who said that any useful statement about the future should at first appear to be ridiculous. So what does that mean? I mean, if I say something about the future and everyone in the room agrees, most likely I'm talking about the present. Right? And of course, the future might make us uncomfortable. It might sound crazy. So for example, everything will be on my phone was not imaginable 40 years ago, right? I mean, calculator was a big device. Each and everything was a separate device. And now it's all becoming one. Of course, that's technology. But even the diversity in the room may not have been a reality even 40, 50 years ago, to be very honest. Yeah? What is a futurist and what is futurist thinking? Of course, you might, if you Google up, you'll find different words. But a futurist, of course, is not a fortune teller. right? We don't pretend to be Nostradamus, but what we do essentially is explore ideas about the future. So what do people think about the future? Help people actually navigate how they plan about the future, etc. And of course, I think it's quite clear throughout the conversation, why does futures have an S? Because they're not just one future. There's multiple possibilities, multiple different futures. But even that on a philosophical level, there might be differences, right, on that too. So as a futurist, what are sort of some of the habits of mind? Oh yeah, sorry, because I'm blocking the screen. Oh, oops, okay, sure, no worries. So why do we, what are some habits of mind as a futurist? So one is to be reflective. So of course, if you look at the image, you can see what's happening here. Yeah, so whatever the rhino is drawing, the horn will always, so each of us probably also have our own rhino horns as well. So just to be aware of our own biases and assumptions is obviously great. So this is also an image of the future that was drawn a long time ago, probably more than 50 years ago. But can you guess, like, what is the assumption here? Anyone in the audience? Sorry? The shape of the car, that's one. Any other assumptions? Sorry? Flying cars, yeah? We still need a driver. Anything else? Who is the driver over here? A man. And who's behind? Right? So that is also an assumption, right? Like, who's preparing the food at the back and who is driving and doing business on the phone, right? So, and of course, these assumptions seep into our images of the future every day. So whenever we see an image of the future, it's important to also understand that there might be some assumptions or beliefs hidden within that particular assumption. Of course, there's no trees also in this image as well. It's like the Jetsons, isn't it? In a way. And of course, the point of a futurist or to engage in futures thinking or futures literacy is to see the world differently. Can anyone guess what is this a picture of? 3 moons? Anything? Where is this picture taken? Mars. And you're right. Whenever I used to give talks, I would always say this is Mars, right? But then I Googled the image. And I saw it's fake news, yeah? And of course, in this day and age, it's also important that we also check the authenticity of what I'm saying. So even, of course, question what I'm saying too. There are different perspectives in the room, and it's sometimes very difficult to see the whole elephant, because each of us might see different aspects of the elephant, right? And then, of course, that's the beauty of it, that's the diversity, but of course, it's also the reason why we talked about collaboration, right? It's important that we need to learn from each other. So what are some questions that we can ask when we engage in futures thinking or in futures literacy? And these are some 8 questions based on some of the lessons learned by futurists over the years. So the first question is, what is the default future, or what is the used future? What does the default future mean? The default future means that if I don't do anything, or if things continue to be as they are, which future are we going towards? So for example, I come from Dhaka. The way Dhaka city is going, maybe there will be more traffic and more air pollution, right? Or maybe not, because we're also building our metro and elevated expressway, and so maybe things might change, but there is a default future. And of course, the default future is not always negative. There might be a positive default future also. If things are going as they are, maybe something good will come up. But there's a default future. And what is a used future? A used future is that I'm borrowing a future from someone else. So for example, the notion of highways, or flyovers, right? A lot of cities build flyovers, but the same cities are also destroying those flyovers. So I can learn from that city, and instead of building flyovers, I can leapfrog, I can jump towards a different future. So for example, technology, there was a disk once upon a time, then we had eventually we had a laser disc, then we had a CD, DVD, and then none of that. So some people probably never had the laser disc, right? And then we just jump straight into whatever forms in which we are consuming files right now. So a used future would be that I must have a laser disc, but I don't need to, right? I can just jump into the future. So the idea is that, or sometimes we say that, oh, we need to be like this country or that country, but maybe not, right? So the point is that what do you think is the default future and whose futures are we borrowing from? The second question is identifying emerging issues. Like what are some things that are weak signals in the system? So for example, a steel company, they were thinking about like different things. For example, they were thinking about carbon pricing and government responsiveness, but they didn't take into account that the global financial crisis might happen, right? Even though there were weak signals. So for example, even the notion of the pandemic, right? I mean, people talked about a pandemic might happen and all that. So not taking something like that into account may cause a problem. Even like earthquakes, right? Earthquakes in some cities might happen anytime, but maybe they're not prepared, even though there are signals for it. So the question is always identify what the emerging issues. And number 3 is don't wait for the bad times. So this is a picture of Rana Plaza. It's a garments factory that broke down. Numbers have been almost at least 5 to 6 years ago. And of course, we knew that the building was not properly up, but of course, we waited for it to fall down. And I think the question is, what futures do you want to avoid right now? Right? We talk about global warming, we talk about things, but are we going to wait for the disaster to happen and then react, as opposed to being proactive and preventing it? Number 4 is, what are alternative futures? So of course, there's not just one future, there are multiple futures. So for example, the future of the university, there's a traditional campus with certain buildings and all that, but of course nowadays the university is also in our hands. The university might be even like a garden university. I think that's Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, where the rooftop is a field you can play in. And of course, there may be one teacher trying to teach multiple students. So of course, this is just an example that what are the alternatives? And of course, it's always good, even in our planning, to think about the multiple alternatives that might happen. The 5th question is, what is the preferred future, and how do we work towards it? So of course, there's a default future. There might be even a predicted future, a future that the trends and the data will tell you that this future is happening. But what is the future that you want? Right? The future that you aspire to. And that might be different from the predicted future. And I think we'll come back to the futures cone in a bit. But essentially, it's this whole idea of thinking about the preferred future is different from the method of forecasting. Because forecasting is from the present, I'm using the current data and thinking about the future. But in this particular case, I'm backcasting. So I think about the future in 2050, 2060. Then I think about what's going to happen in 2040, what needs to happen in 2030, 2025, and then 2023. So you work backwards. And it's a different way of thinking and working towards the future. And of course, like he said, there's a whole area of possible futures. Of course, outside possible futures, there are impossible futures. Right now, we think it's impossible. Maybe it might become possible. But there are also probable futures, right? Futures that are likely to happen. So it's likely to rain today again, or maybe tomorrow. But it's not likely that it's going to snow, right? But the preferred future may sit outside a bit outside the realm of probability, right? Because the preferred future right now may not seem that probable. But the hope is that if we act together, if we do certain action, and slowly it becomes, the probability of the preferred future increases. So I think it's one thing to note. There have been slight criticisms about the futures cone. This one quick criticism is that it kind of assumes that there's a singular present, but of course there are multiple realities in the present, and there are multiple ways in which we can think about history. But the basic idea is that we think about these different types of futures. And of course, the image of the future is so important, right? Because quickly, if you look at this, it basically says that once the future, like as long as the society's image of the future is positive and flourishing, the flower of the culture is in full blossom. So it talks about the importance of like positive images or images that help us aspire towards the future. And of course, if you look at the newspapers every day, depending on which newspaper you read, you'll probably see a number of negative images because that sells, right? And of course, it's important that we keep those futures alive. And this is where story comes in, right? Like what stories do we need to work towards the preferred future? And of course, irrespective of whatever strategy or policy or law or system you come up with, you'll see that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? That means that, and we'll see this in a bit, that it's so important to think about what are the stories that exist already about whatever we're working towards. So, and this is kind of like linked to this idea that as a futurist, it's not enough just to observe and think about the future, but we need to act towards the future. So you cannot just be a painter painting someone who's falling down from the building, but you need to actually do something about it. So this is a framework called causal layered analysis, and it starts with the litany, the headlines, right? The tip of the iceberg. And as you know about icebergs, that 10 to 20% is on the top, or 10% is on top, and the majority is at the bottom. And you'll notice that a lot of the times, like for whatever phenomena we're seeing, so I use the example of like violence against women, right? You'll see the headlines. There might be different things happening, right? Whether it's incidents of violence, rape, etc. It's all there on the tip of the iceberg. And number two is that there are different systems that we try to create in order to solve this problem. Like we come up with new laws, we try to increase the number of police, we may try to increase the light in the streets, we may try to increase the price of acid, etc. But a lot of the times, even if new laws and policies are passed, we see the change does not happen, right? And the reason why is that the philosophy, the mindset has not changed. So as long as the mindset continues to be male chauvinistic or patriarchal, then irrespective of whatever systems you make, you'll see that reality is not shifted. And a lot of theories of change will stop here. Like we have to change mindsets, we have to change beliefs. But how do we do that? We think about what are the myths and metaphors and stories that exist that lead to the particular mindset. So the story that boys are better than girls or men are stronger than women will create the male chauvinistic mindset, the patriarchal mindset. And that story has to change. That story can be that men and women are equal. It can be that men and women are different, but each have their own rights. It can be that all humans are equal. Or it can be that all humans are different, each have their own rights. And each come up with a different philosophy. One is feminism, one is post-feminism, or humanism, or post-humanism. But the point is, as long as the stories are the same, things will not change. So what kind of stories will be different? So for example, if you think about Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, what is happening? The prince is always saving the princess. But if you think about Moana, Frozen, Inside Out, things are changing, right? Where you don't need a prince. Like the female is enough to actually save the day and figure it out. So of course, there are different people working on the different places. So on the systems level, you'll see policymakers. On the worldview level, there's writers, philosophers, intellectuals. At the story level, it's storytellers and artists. And the cool thing is that you need all sorts of disciplines to work together, right? So scientists and engineers, even if you want more and more people to learn about STEM, you still need people who are writing about the philosophy of STEM to work together. You still need storytellers and artists to draw images of STEM. So you still need the arts and humanities if you want to work towards a different future. And of course, this is antithetical to the idea that sometimes arts and humanities is getting defunded and all that. But if you want to go towards a different future, you would need multiple disciplines to work together. So all disciplines have their importance. And of course, this is just a timeline, but of course, this can change, right? So usually, most planning happens in 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, and all that. But then, of course, worldviews and myths take time to change. But of course, in the age of social media, in the age of viral marketing, stories can change quite rapidly also, whereas in the past, maybe it took a longer time for myths and metaphors to change. And of course, dreaming is not done in bullet points, right? It's done in stories, right? I don't think about isms in my head unless you're thinking about isms all day, right? Or if you, like we don't dream in PowerPoint presentations unless you're building PowerPoints all day. But otherwise, it's images, right? And the story is definitely so important. And of course, Sohail, who came up with the framework of causal layer analysis, he says that if you can figure out your story, you can use your story to enable and leverage a possible future. In essence, you're the writer of your own story. So finally, of course, who do you work with? The advice is don't work with resistors. They're a minority, people who oppose your idea. Work with people who are already believe in your change, and they're people who are potentially going to come to your change. The majority is asleep, apparently. I mean, they don't care, but that's just good advice. And of course, sometimes we try to spend too much time on the resistors, but that's a particular strategy. And of course, the question is who's not in the room right now? I mean, of course, you can look around, and of course, it's difficult to get everyone in the room, I agree. But who should be in the conversation that is here not right now? And hopefully you get the slides later on, and you can have a look at what the questions are. But the point of futures thinking essentially is to regain influence and agency over the future. In Bangladesh, we've worked on our textbooks, and introducing futures thinking into grade 6 on the Life and Livelihoods textbook. We've also worked with the Prime Minister's Office on the futures of Bangladesh in 2041 in education. And myself, I'm going for my PhD to Tamkang University on foresight in educational leadership and technology management. So essentially, futures thinking is there to help you see the invisible. And of course, only those who are able to see the invisible are able to do the impossible. And hopefully you agree with the statement, right, by now, that any useful statement about the future should at first seem to be ridiculous. So thank you. So. Oh, sure. Any questions or anything? Yeah. What other ridiculous statements? So I mean, in history, I don't know if you heard about Begum Rokeya and Sultana's Dream. Have you heard about Sultana's Dream? So it's a science fiction story that she's Bengali, but she wrote it in English, where roles were reversed, and she wrote it probably before the 1950s, if I'm not wrong. And it's a story where women were in charge of authority, and the men were at home cooking and inside the houses. So to some people, of course, I mean, she wanted to provoke that being ridiculous. I think a lot of science fiction seems ridiculous, right? Like I think when you're looking at Star Trek and all that, even when we're growing up, some things are happening as we speak. What else could be? I mean, I think if any sector that you, like for example, back home we have opposing political parties. So those parties working together and doing something good is also a ridiculous statement. I mean, I'm sure people can relate, yeah? But yeah, but why not? Why can't we imagine? So I don't know, there's not a single film that actually explicitly says that young people from these different parties transform those parties and then everyone is working together. That story doesn't exist in our cultural psyche. So that's also a ridiculous future. Sure. Oh yeah, I think the idea of anyone can be part of this community. I mean, this community should not be exclusive, right? Because everyone has the ability to think about the future. But of course, what futurists are trying to do is trying to come up with different methods, tools, and frameworks to think about the future. And I'm sure the astrologer community may also have their particular tools or framework. But I think it's a conversation that can be had. But of course, I think what futurists have found, I mean, in the past, futurists would do more predictions, right? But they found that predictions don't really help because anything might come out. I think you've heard about black swans, this idea that that there's some random events that we couldn't predict that completely change history, right? So I think, yeah. So my point to the question is that I think anyone can be part of the community. Sure.
I have one question. So what is your ridiculous statement about the future in 2050? And second is, we can have a ridiculous statement of our own, but so what? So what should we do about it, right? So
okay.
What is my question?
Yeah. All right. So the thing is, so my introduction into future studies was in 2012 when I was working as a researcher in BRAC University on educational development. So Sohail Inayatullah, he came to BRAC University to do a workshop on the futures of BRAC University in 2030. So that's the first time I heard about future studies and futures thinking. And as a result, I heard about this notion that in the Singapore Prime Minister's office or even in Korea's Prime Minister's office, there's a futures unit, like a unit that helps all other ministries to think about the future or build their capacity to think about the future. And I thought, like, why can't we have something like that in our Prime Minister's office, right? So I think the seed was planted in 2012. And I don't know whether it's completely ridiculous, but of course, I mean, at that time I had no access to anything. But in 2016, I think I happened to have a meeting where I think I got connected to another futurist that worked with our Prime Minister's office. Then I was able to walk down our Prime Minister's whatever grand road and essentially have a meeting where yeah, like why don't we do a futures workshop together? And I think there was complete silence after that meeting. But in 2 years, I think suddenly at midnight I had a call, and then essentially we did a Futures of Education Bangladesh in 2041 with our Prime Minister's office, where I was facilitating with government and non-government stakeholders. And of course, since then I'm like the resident futurist for our government's innovation agency. So I think so it was a ridiculous idea, but I think it's the belief that in your decision making and day to day, like you believe in that particular future, right? Because I think that's where the imagination really helps. Because if you inset in your imagination, then I think whatever decisions and conversations you're having, you're slowly like pushing and pulling towards it. And of course, it may not happen in one day, but you're at it, right? And I think, and of course, if more people are, you've seen that video where one lonely person is dancing crazily, and then some people join, a lot of people join, and everyone is. So it's also kind of like that, right? I think just start dancing crazily, and hopefully people will join your dance. So. Oh, you good?
Yep.
Okay, thank you guys. All right.
Thank you, Shakil, for that. I would say, I think like when we started off in the morning, there was a lot of, like we said, scary was the word, but I think your session does kind of create some hope in the ability to imagine. And I think you've left us with a lot of thoughtful questions as well, which we should also answer for ourselves. I think one is, what are the used futures that we are maybe sitting on right now? And what are the stories that we are telling ourselves, which maybe need to shift to actually move towards the futures that we want? And I think moving from forecasting to backcasting, and really kind of leading from the future we want rather than leading from what we've known in the past to kind of move towards the future. So on that note, we will break for tea, and I hope you stay with these questions and take them into your conversations, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. And tea is being served outside. Also take time to go through some of the exhibits.
Check.
Check, check, hey. Check, hey, hey, check. Check, check.
Check, check, check. Check, check. More gain, gain, more. Check, 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 check one.
Check, 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 check one. Hey, 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 check. Check, check, check one. Hey, hey, check. Check, check, hey, check.
Check, check, check. Check, 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 check one, one. The monitors on the stage. The monitors on the stage.
Check,
Just sit there, take your place.
Aparna, can we get everybody in? Yep. Yes. All right. Welcome back, everybody. And hopefully you've had an interesting morning so far. Lots of thought-provoking questions for sure. And I think we ended with a good question in the end, right? Like the so what? So what if we are thinking about the future? So what if we are able to imagine the future? And for that, I'd actually like to invite on stage Priyanka and Bhavna, who spent the last 1 year actually engaging in this research on futures thinking with young people across 3 states in Assam, Odisha, and Gujarat. And they also tried to explore with young people that if the future is looking like this, so what? So what does this mean for us? And what do we want to do about it? So I'd like to invite them on the stage to share some of the highlights and findings from the research, and then we'll get into an interesting panel to build on it further as well.
Hello. The clicker. This is the clicker. Right, this works. Thank you all. Thanks, Neha. In the last 1 year, we've heard a lot about futures. We had Shakil speak about the futures. We had young people share anxieties about their futures. In the last 1 year, we have been conducting Emancipatory Climate Futures Literacy Workshop. with 500 plus youth in 36 districts, conducting participatory action research. What led us to this central idea was the fact that a lot of times when we really got into the field, what we really wanted to know was what was the aspirations for young people. But soon enough, very soon in the duration of the research project, what we figured was that two things. One, that future was approached with extreme anxiety. We don't know if we will be alive in 20 years. Future को कैसे हम सोच सकते हैं? क्या बात कर रहे हैं आप? मेरा future तो कागज के जितना bright है. So just the fact that just even considering future or thinking about the future generated a lot of anxiety for young people and they had multiple orientation and it intersected with different marginalities. For instance, if you were from a T-tribe community in Assam, it was impossible for them to think whether they will even survive. So that was something that we saw. The second variable that we saw was that climate change. We have heard from the youth themselves, and you have listened to the stories in the morning about a young girl from Majuli speaking about floods, soil erosion. We've spoken about Talcher, which is an industrial belt and the mining belt. There is no way that when we went to Assam, floods and soil erosion was something very, very serious. And this is also intersectional. For instance, a lot of young people, if you are a woman, the kind of marginalizations you face due to climate change is extremely different. For instance, if you're from Kalahandi, and it does not really miss students also. So we brought in two key variables, thinking about the future and climate change, and conducted workshops called as Climate Futures Literacy Workshops. Now it brings in the ideas of two different streams, one being liberatory pedagogy, which speaks to making power structures visible, and the second being futures literacy. The fact that, as we've all spoken about from morning, is that can you imagine a future? Is it a borrowed imagination or is it a purchased imagination? Can you think back and ask, is it really a true choice that you're making? Reimagine, dream again, and finally, go back and see how you can make this a reality. So essentially, what Climate Futures Literacy does is that it returns agency to young people, enabling a sense of control and by infusing hope for action in what already feels like a desperate times. So briefly again, coming back to the process of Climate Futures Literacy, we started with introduction to futures. So just the idea being, can you make them comfortable even thinking about the future? Back to the present, where they're allowed to sit with some of the existing injustices and injustices they feel are present, and it borrows from the idea of Inyatullah's Stages of Futures, which speaks about the fact that if you have to even think about the future, you need to give space for people to articulate some of the injustice they're speaking to they're facing in the present. The third one is opening the future. So we use Edward Bono's ideas of provocation, of how to imagine better. We also use the scenarios method, which acts as nudges. The fourth one is stay in the future. Yes, it causes you discomfort, but can you really stay there? And then finally, the transcendence, moving towards alternate possibilities and agency towards preferred futures. So our process essentially was, we started with introduction to futures. It started with inhibition, and finally it's really thinking about personal futures. What are your aspirations? How do you look at yourself in the next 20 years? And some of the things that came across pretty strongly was that sometimes it was just the next job that young people were after. Other times, it could be that they want to occupy spaces historically which they have not been able to occupy. For instance, with the tree tribe community that I was speaking about in the morning in Assam just now, is that if you are from the tree tribe community, then the aspirations stem from becoming teachers and doctors, but the idea was also that historically they have not occupied such spaces, and therefore they want to occupy these spaces. The third idea was that a lot of them also spoke to social aspirations. We don't have hospitals in our village, we don't have doctors, and therefore we want to have doctors. So there's a lot of social cause that they wanted to solve even. Now, for community futures, a lot of the community futures that came in, now as Shakil had mentioned before, where a lot of them used futures, and these are borrowed imaginations. But used futures are not essentially bad. It's just not alternate or just not a different way of thinking. So a lot of young people that we spoke to spoke about different kinds of futures that they want for their, different kinds of futures that they want for. So aspirational futures. We would like to be the next Rourkela in Odisha. We would like to be the next Guwahati in Assam. Solution-based futures. We would like to solve the problem for water, which is very fair, but also you're thinking from the constraints of your present. Technology-based futures. It's all going to be solved by technology. Climate change, no worries, technology is going to save us. No futures. But sometimes what happened was that a lot of young people also were not able to imagine futures at all. There's no possibility for futures because their past has not told them that change is possible. The third step that we had was back to present. So the central idea of back to present that I've spoken about earlier as well is the 4 stages of future. The idea that there has to be space for you to speak to your present injustices so you can move on to even processing some of the emotions that you have related to the present anger, so you have cognitive and emotional space to even think about the future. So for instance, just have a look at this picture when they were taken back to the present as to what are the challenges that you're facing. And this is a picture drawn by a class 8th grade student in Karsalia in Bhavnagar. And you see that he's drawn a man who is standing there, there's a gun, there's a person lying down. So the person lying down is the young person, and the person standing there is a manager of a coal mine, an open cast coal mine. And the gun there, apparently the manager does hold a gun, which he doesn't use, but he's depicted this, saying how hopeless they feel. हमने तो protest किया था, मगर फिर भी हमारा land ले गए. So there are some deeply felt injustices already that exist, and it comes across quite strongly. For instance, युवाओं की बेकारी बढ़ रही है. हमें पता नहीं है ITI के बाद हम क्या करेंगे. हम Zomato या फिर Flipkart में चले जाएंगे. सिर्फ 40 रुपया मिल जाएगा. या फिर नहाने को भी पानी नहीं मिलता. There are environmental concerns also. So when there is a distinction between, say that you are from a place where you don't get piped water and you're only actually relying on natural resources, and then you have a problem saying there is increased heat but we don't even have water to take bath. So these are like present injustices and challenges that young people face. And just the fact that very important step of the Futures Literacy process is that gives space for them to process some of these emotions and sit with some of these injustices and articulate it so they're able to open it up further.
What was interesting to us was the fact that when they were thinking about their future, they were thinking about their personal futures and community futures. Climate crisis was not occurring in those futures. Even though present climate crisis was very much a reality. As we heard in the first session, Assam flooding, there are people living beside a coal mine. They were thinking about their future. Climate crisis was not there. So that led us to wonder why is that the climate crisis is not reached. And we realize that the understanding that we have on the community have about crisis is as follows. First, they think that it's a natural occurrence. It's God-given. Nature is right. भगवान ने किया है, हमारा कोई नहीं है. Or it's normalized. Therapy told us in the morning that kids are living floods for 3 months every year. Something that is normalized for them. अब तो आदत पड़ गई है. A lot of students in all the 3 states said no matter what environment degradation or floods or cyclones or heat, it was आदत पड़ गई है, इसके साथ जीना पड़ेगा. Third is it was an othered phenomenon, that it's not something that's done by us, it's the other community that's done it, so the blame is on them. Fourth was that it's a temporary thing. It's only happening in this time, in this moment, but we have a lot of we have a lot of faith in the government, and they will find a solution, and that's why it will not be present in the future. The fifth was as an accepted byproduct, as we heard Rajashri speak in the morning, that a lot of people in Talcher also told us that pollution hai to paisa hai. So as long as there are industries, we have to live with this environmental degradation. It's just something that we have to accept. So our pivotal point here in the workshop was the next step, where we wanted to open up these futures and bring climate crisis as a variable so that they can think about the futures of climate crisis. We did this in 3 ways. The first was creating an exaggerated scenario of the problems they spoke about in the present. So if someone is speaking about floods in the present, we said, okay, what if in 20 years in category was we created utopian scenarios. So in areas which were environmentally degraded, like mining belts, like for example in Keonjhar in Odisha, it's an iron mine belt. So we told them, what if in the next 20 years the air is very clean, the temperature does not rise above 38, and you can see the sky and the stars at night? What kind of a world would that be? What changes would you see in the society? Or third, we gave some scientific predictions and we fictionalized them. For example, in Bhavnagar, we told students that scientists are predicting that by 2040, Bhavnagar might submerge because of the sea level rise. What do you think the future will be at that time? In the beginning, and these were all ridiculous futures for the students because they were not thinking about climate crisis as much in the future. So at first, their reaction was denial. They were like, in Bhavnagar, for example, students were like, scientists to kuch bhi bolte rehte hain, ye to ho hi nahi sakta. Then afterwards, when we asked them to stay in this future and just imagine a world, just for argument's sake, if we imagine the world, what will the world look like? They moved towards a little bit of anxiety and helplessness, but they started giving a lot of individualized solutions, like we have to start planting trees, or we have to reduce waste, or we have to create awareness programs. Priyanka, next slide. So these are some of the imaginations that students thought about, like in Lower Assam, everything will flood, or if the heat increases in Gujarat, it will be a drought region. But when we asked them to stay in this future and think about what are the kind of changes that will happen in different kinds of sectors and different ways of living, like how will education change if that is a reality? How will agriculture change? How will work change? So on and so forth. They started thinking about each and every problem. They took it apart, they sat with it, they figured out how things will change, and they presented a holistic picture of the future. It was dystopian a little bit. It was actually in the gray, but a lot of kids said that thinking about this is making me scared because I'm thinking about this for the first time. But then we gave them another nudge, which is the next step of our process. We asked them, it's not like people are going to migrate, which is something that they said a lot, but then we asked them, what are the adaptation strategies can you think of at an individual, at a community, and a system level? That is when they started thinking how kids will adapt to these scenarios, to these climate crisis stressors and shocks. An example that you can see here is a water bank, which students thought of in the future of Gujarat when water will be a scarcity. Each village and community will get their own water bank, and this will be governed by a locally elected body, and every community will have a representation in this water bank. This actually came up because the students were talking about the caste atrocities that happen, and that is why they said that in the future, if we want to have access to water, equal access to water, equal representation needs to be given in this water bank. Similarly, this is a future from Upper Assam, where students said, if it's going to flood every 6 months, we will need a resource bank that the government will control, and people will put some of the resources that they can grow in the 6 months when it doesn't flood, so they can store it here, and when it's flooding, they can take it back. And these kind of futures you'll see in the exhibits there as well. There are a lot of solutions like that. So what we saw, the kind of skills that are needed for this process, was that it's very important to have imagination, and we saw students utilizing this skill when they were imagining the futures. Second, initially there was a lot of denial, dismissal, but after some time, they were open to the idea of future and staying in that idea for some time, even if it was causing discomfort. Third, critical thinking. It was very important for them to question their own assumptions and their idea. In the beginning, as Priyanka also said, their futures were, they were thinking about, I want this for my village, it will be the next Guwahati, it will be the next Ahmedabad, but it completely shifted when climate crisis as a variable was brought to them. Fourth, reflexivity. They were reflective about their own assumptions, their own ways of thinking. And empathy, they were also a lot of communities, a lot of kids who were relatively well off. We brought in some stories from marginalized, how marginalized people are affected by climate crisis, and that changed the way they were thinking about the situation. And cognitive flexibility, which is being open to new information. So the students were open to this new scenario that we gave them, and they utilized this and thought about the kind of futures they wanted.
Thanks, Bhavna. So, what were the shifts that were seen during the process in the students? We told you initially that there were a lot of stories or emotional stories that they kept the current understanding of climate change in place. For instance, is it viewed as normal? Is it viewed as natural? Then all of these understandings, what happens is that it forecloses action. And the second thing that we saw, and we did a causal layered analysis using Inyatula's framework, is that a lot of times, even when students were able to articulate some of these injustices, and during the process, when you ask them what are the causes, they were able to identify it. But later during the process, to map it back to the significant actors, they were unable to do it because their imaginations were being borrowed by dominant paradigms. For instance, in a place like Talsher, who you heard from in the morning, a lot of young people said, okay, yes, there are companies and there is a problem with industries, we are not having air to breathe, but when it came to what do you think or who are the actors who should act, it was always, maybe it is the other person who's thrown waste and we should ask them to stop throwing waste, or it would be, it is because the other person is not cleaning the lake. So it was always like directed elsewhere and a not true a causal analysis of it. So what happens during this process is that those stories that keep some of these assumptions in place are shifted. So for instance, what happens is that they're able to systemically identify the other systemic actors. So they also spoke about how they can act on their own. They spoke about how they will organize and go to the government. They spoke about a lot more actors into this phenomena and were able to identify pathways of action, which also made them feel not so much of a helplessness or a powerlessness, but took them to the place of hope. I'll just move on to the next one. I think we are almost through with the time. But key principles that we really articulate for such a framework is that creating dialogical spaces where you actually prioritize openness and criticality, which is very important. Second is that, like this has been stressed enough, articulation of injustice is important if you have to move to the future. Introducing anxiety towards building constructive hope. So many times, a lot of times there's unhindered optimism saying everything is going to be fine. But if you really want to turn at that, the risk is that there is inertia in that, there is inaction in that. So if you want to turn something into actionable, you have to make it something into a constructive hope, which means somewhere you see yourself as an actor who can act on this challenge. The fourth one is making alternative perspectives visible by challenging deep stories and assumptions held true. This is important because whose imagination, you call something called as empathetic imagination, which means whose futures are you also considering when you're creating your own future, which I think Akash also brought up in his keynote, that you need to consider others, your peers, how will they be affected, what kind of social structures would they have. So this kind of empathetic imagination requires that you have a diverse group and you make some of these diverse perspectives, imaginations visible. The fifth thing is, which has already been covered, making constructive hope possible. And the final thing that we would want to leave you with is that a lot of young people said, after the process, ki man ki badas nikal gayi. Our frustrations which were bottled up felt really easy on us. Do you want to share some more that we have?
Yeah, one last thing. So another thing that students said was, we never thought about this problem in such depth. And now that we have thought about this, we want to go back to our communities, think of some solutions that only we can think of, and somehow figure out how to take this to the government. This happened in a lot of states. Thank you.
Thank you. Uh, to launch the report, I would like to invite Akash Sethi, Rohan Dabi, Sheetal Ben, Sherman Cruz, Professor Sherman Cruz, Shakil Ahmed, Neha, Korobi, and
Rajashri.
Rajashri. If you can please come on the stage. I would also like to invite Arjun Bahadur.
Okay, so just unwrap the ribbon and we'll play a video about the report as well. In the background,
Rohan, Korobi,
watch the video.
How does it feel? We are so late. We are so late. How does it feel?
So there's a poster in your kit that has a QR code. You can use the QR code to download your own copy of the report as well and give it a read and share your feedback with us as well. And I'll hand it back to Priyanka to take this forward.
Yeah, thanks, Neha. Yes, if I could please request all the delegates, everybody to stay for a picture, please, a photograph. Korobi, if you're here, Sheetal Ben, if you could please come on stage, we would love to have you here. And we've spoken to Sheetal Ben as part of the workshop. फोटो के लिए हाँ Thank you everybody. I would request Professor Sherman Cruz and Arjun Bahadur to please stay back. Thank you. Thanks, Sheetal. It's a pleasure to introduce the panel for the day, where we're going to discuss on futures literacy as a critical skill for youth. We have with us Professor Sherman Cruz. Professor Sherman Cruz is the UNESCO Chair on Anticipatory Governance and Regenerative Cities at Northwestern University, Philippines. He holds leadership roles as Chair of Association of Professional Futurists and the Millennium Project, Philippines. He's also the founder and chief futurist at the Center for Engaged Foresight. We'd also like to welcome, we also have with us Arjun Bahadur. Arjun is the lead for the Life Skills Collaborative, a large multi-stakeholder collaborative to catalyze government action around life skills in India. The LSE has 18 organizations working together on championing life skills for India's young people to thrive by co-creating public goods in the space. Welcome. Welcome to both of you. I think I'll dive deep in to probably one of the questions that the audience have as well, is the fact that you have been with LSE, you have worked in the collaboration space, and I know you've spoken in our previous conversations about the effort that it takes to bring everybody together in the same space. Why another skill? Should we be looking at futures literacy as another life skill or a 21st century skill?
Thank you. Am I audible to everyone? Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Priyanka, and thank you for inviting me here. I know we spoke a lot about how the number of skills have evolved over a period of time, and we are looking at more and more skills that are coming in under the ambit of what we call life skills. For me, from what I've understood about future literacy, is a collection of skills in some sense. And the entire morning has been fascinating to hear about how can one think about the future, how can we think about the future without the biases of the present, and how can we be ruthless in some sense to think about what the future can bring for us. But at the heart of it, I feel like there is a need to build agency in people to be able to think about the possibilities of the future. And for me, I think when we talk about the Life Skills Collaborative, just to give you a little bit of a background, the Life Skills Collaborative in the last 3 years has worked to accumulate 52 skills that we define in something that we call the glossary. And I think Priyanka's question is stemming from the fact that what started out as probably 5 skills in the early 90s with the WHO came out with to 52 skills in the glossary today. Is there a space for a new skill called future literacy? And I think my understanding of future literacy, as you pointed out, is a combination of about 6 skills, and I think there is a little bit more that can actually go in. So for me, I don't think it is the point of adding a new skill, but I think it's the identification of the skills that are required to think about the future. So I don't see future literacy as a new skill in itself. I see it as a utilization or the manifestation or the contextualization of some of these skills that are already existing and that we continue to talk about. So when we talk about critical thinking as being a part of future literacy, or we think about imagination as being a part of future literacy, or cognitive flexibility, these are all skills that we've already defined, that we know that exist. I think the new thing that we are talking about today is the contextualization or the manifestation of how we use these skills to build agency in our young people to think about the future that possibly needs to exist. And for me, I think it's an advanced skill. And if you do think of future literacy as a skill, I think for a young person today in a context like India, from the context that we heard in the morning, and your report shows that the present is going to influence what the future is going to, how young people think about future. And for them to be able to think about the future without those biases needs these life skills to be built in these young people. So I wouldn't say that we're talking about a new skill here. I think we're talking about utilizing a set of identified skills and using them to manifest the agency in young people to be able to think about the future.
Thank you, Arjun. So let's pause on that thought for a bit, and I will pick that strand up of if futures literacy is a different skill or not. But before that, Sherman, Professor Sherman, question to you is, we heard from Shakil that the Bangladesh government has in the prescribed textbook futures literacy chapter for the youth. And the second thing is that in 2012, UNESCO comes up and says that futures literacy is a capability and a skill that everybody, all young people needs to possess. But it also says it's beyond the existing life skills framework or the 21st century skills framework. So what are your thoughts on that, and what kind of interventions has UNESCO done across the world on building this as a skill, and why? Why is it called as a literacy?
Yeah, I was a part of the UNESCO core team that actually shaped the idea of futures literacy way back in 2012, wherein they invited several futurists, to figure out ways to democratize foresight. Because apparently before that, it was highly elitist. It was only accessible to companies and corporations, the military, NASA, the US government, those on top that actually, in more ways than one, wants to colonize all our futures. But then
in the 3-day conversation that we've had, realized that anticipation is a natural mental propensity that we have. It's just natural, right? Before you wake up in the morning, you anticipate things here and there. Right? You plan for the next 3 days. You plan for the next 6 months. So it's a natural mental propensity that we have. The thing is that we're unconsciously anticipating things and we don't see the value of it. That's when we thought of the idea of creating value in that mental propensity of anticipating things or anticipating the future. So the idea of futures literacy is to make people aware that you can anticipate the future consciously. And it's like you're reading and writing, right? So imagine an illiterate person and a literate person who can read, write, and count numbers. Compare that to the person who does not have that kind of skill set. So you could see the gap, right? And then we strive to make everyone literate as an outcome. Because people who are literate can actually like amplify that ability, to build societies, change the nature of social contracts, invent, create wealth, develop ideas and innovation, among other things. Now, what if a person is future literate? So futures literacy goes beyond, of course, step one is that you have to be conscious about it. But then once you're conscious about your natural mental propensity to anticipate things even before they occur, is that you amplify it and shape it in a way that, hey, this could also become some sort of a capability and competency to anticipate things and build alternative future worlds. Because futures and foresight, in the context of futures literacy, is not just about imagining alternative future worlds, but then developing your capability to use these future worlds as a resource, as an asset, and as a skill set to innovate and change today. That's the purpose of futures literacy. That is the reason why UNESCO shaped this idea of futures literacy as a skill set, because the future is something that you can use, like the past and the present, as an asset to transform today.
Sure. Thanks, Professor Sherman. Now, just picking back from the idea, I think one thing that you make clearly is that it amplifies competencies. Is that correct? So how would, if you could respond to Arjun Bahadur's point that just if we have critical thinking, just if we have cognitive flexibility, and just if we have, I know imagination is not in the skill set and we'll come to that later, but if these skill sets are present, is that enough to be future literate?
Yeah, let me just try to reflect on my experience being a pre-future literate and post-future literate person. Yeah, because at some point in my life, I also learned about this somewhere in 2007. And then back then, I was in my master's, right, in public administration. I worked in the government at one point in my life. As I was a chief of staff of a governor. So my pre-future literate journey as a public servant or as a member of the civil service was that I'm overly too focused on the problems that we had year in, year out. It's been dragging us, burning me out in the last 10 years. I have no energy. I want to quit because the problem reoccurs every time, right? The conversation that we had as far as poverty is concerned in the context of public policy was the same problem that we had 10 years after. So I was pretty kind of tired. And then what happened to me is that I resigned. And then I started looking, for some alternative ways of knowing, which of course I've discovered futures thinking. And when I learned about futures thinking, it gives me some sort of a realization that, hey, this is a different way of knowing reality. This is a different way of conversation wherein people can actually have the opportunity to reveal their implicit understanding about the present. And exploring ways by which we can transcend ourselves from that trap of poverty, of trauma, and fear. So the journey that I had when I started learning about foresight is that, it's possible to actually change the present by using the future as a lens to reframe our ways of knowing climate change, our ways of knowing poverty, social contracts, legal things, among other things. This is something that you can actually apply about several things. But then, of course, going back to your question regarding the skills that I currently had, right? For example, critical thinking skill set, digital literacy skill set, negotiation skill sets, among other things, is that without foresight, I tend to think of these things as transformative or something that can be resolved in the next 10, 15 years. Even in my personal futures, I tend to think about success in the next 10 years. But then when I learned about foresight, I understood and realized that it had amplified my capacity to negotiate, to network, to research, to analyze, and be critical about things and positive about things. Is that the learning that I get, that the vision that I had for myself in 10 years was that I was able to achieve it in 1 year or 2 years. That was the realization that I had. And then I realized that foresight is pretty quite powerful, because if things becomes urgent as far as hope is concerned, you're going to do something about it, and you'll figure out yourself that it's something that you can actually do now. And if you keep on doing it, the 10 years or 40 visions that you have might possibly be done on Monday morning.
Thank you, Sherman. Professor Sherman, I'm going to summarize it and I'll allow you to respond. I think 2 key points that I hear from you is that, yes, it amplifies competencies, but also that a lot of time these skills, we are looking at it from a problem-solving lens. So what futures literacy does, it changes the framework and allows you to be much more conscious about the future and brings a future orientation to the whole process. So I would, if you'd like to respond, Arjun brother, or I could proceed.
Sure, yeah. No, I think I agree to what Professor Sherman is saying. And I do think that it's important to think about the future, not just from a climate perspective as we saw, but generally as a skill set to be able to shape your immediate future from a long-term future vision perspective. But I think for me, the interactions that I've had with organizations who work with young people today, I think there are a few steps that actually lead to that point. And I think the first thing, of course, is awareness. And are we even aware of what these skills are? And if you talk about building these skill sets in young people, as part of the Life Skills Collaborative, one of the things that we did, we went out and spoke to young people across the country. We spoke to, over the last couple of years, we've spoken to more than 50,000 people across 15 states. And we asked them if they were even aware of some of these life skills as skills that they can develop or they need to have. And the results were very surprising. We spoke to young people, we spoke to parents, we spoke to teachers, and we found that the awareness of these skills was not uniform. It was not there for certain skills that you would think. For example, a skill like critical thinking, the awareness itself was about 30%. And some of the other skills was slightly higher. So if the first step of awareness isn't there, I think when we start talking about future literacy, we have to think about how do we get to the point where a young person has the agency to be able to think about that. You mentioned yourself that you were in a master's program and the exposure that you had allowed you to take that step forward. But how do I empower the youth today that doesn't have that exposure? And I think for me, the foundation lies in building these skills. The second step then would become recognition of the importance of these skills. So one is awareness. The second step is recognition, because then it's only when we recognize that these skills are important that we will take steps like today. We are all gathered here to think about how do we build these skills in young people. And I think the national education policy has done us all a big favor by calling out the need for 21st century skills. And I think it's that kind of recognition that drives or catalyzes action. So I think awareness, I think recognition of the importance. And then third, I think the important question is how do you scale it? And when we started thinking about scale, that's when we realized a whole different set of problems that need to be solved before we can actually seriously scale future literacy. One is, even as a language, as a common vocabulary, we all speak a different vocabulary when we think about life skills. Is it life skills? Is it 21st century skills? Is it social emotional skills? Is it high order thinking skills? Is it core skills? Are all these the same? Or are all these different? And the more we spoke to people, we realized that some people actually use these terms very differently, whereas some people actually use them interchangeably. Then we started digging a little bit deeper and we started looking at definitions for these skills that exist. So let me ask you, right? Critical thinking, we all know critical thinking. But if I ask you to define critical thinking, we will have 100 different definitions of critical thinking in this room. Until we don't define it in a common way, it's very hard to teach it. And if you can't teach it, and if you're all teaching to different things, then we can't really measure what we are teaching. And if we can't measure it, then we don't know the progress that we are making. So I feel like future literacy is a must, but I think there are certain steps that we need to take to get to the point where we can think about building future literacy in young people. So common vocabulary then for me became in a sense of trying to scale the skill set in young people. I think one thing we are all agreeing is that these skills are essential for future literacy, right? So we need to build critical thinking in young people. But then the question arises, how do we do it? And if we can't define critical thinking the same way, and this is in the application of it. WHO will define critical thinking as the ability to think critically and arrive at a judgment. UNICEF will define critical thinking as the ability to think critically, full stop. So can we agree whether arriving at a judgment is part of critical thinking or not? Are we going to teach that to children? Are we going to measure that? And if we all don't know this and we can't align on it, then it becomes a challenge in terms of how do we equip young, which is what the challenge of life, everybody knows that life skills is important. But when we try and transact that with young people, we find that there are different pathways to it. And while in the implementation the pathways can be different, the heart, the language, the vocabulary, I feel needs to be the same. And I think when we think about future literacy, we think about building these skills in children. If we want this to be scaled, if we really want children to come together and think, young people to think about this, I think we need to identify the steps that will help build that. And I think starting at the common vocabulary is probably the first step. So I'm going to pause with that and give it back to you.
Thanks, Arjun.
I just would like to quickly build
on that idea.
Sure.
Yeah, imagining alternative future worlds or imagining hope is a radical thing to do. It's not easy, right? While we hope for things and we wish, for better things to all of us amidst all of this crisis or multiple crises that we have, is that hope is a radical thing to do. And radical ideas and radical futures require radical life skills, right? We need ordinary life skills, like, for example, like skill set might not be enough in a business as usual context, right? Like, for example, we just process data for the sake of it, to generate wealth, for efficiency and productivity, among other things. Why, if you build some critical thinking skills and try to make sense of this data, is that you can build more hopeful ideas, and transformative innovations if you're critical about it. So what we're currently having here is some sort of a critical futures thinking conversation. How do you actually enable the future that you imagine, wherein both your mind and heart speaks to it, build the skills necessary to actually do it.
Thank you, Professor Sherman. So I think Professor Sherman's opened up a little bit of another strand to it, and he's calling it radical life skills. How would you, and you picked up the stand saying that we need a common vocabulary, and I see two separate strands here, but just one question before we move into the integration of, you also picked the strand up on integration of futures literacy and life skills in schools, but let's come to that a little later. But I would like to stay with this conversation of radical life skills and how these skills are different. So I think, Professor Sherman, this is for you, is that we know that critical thinking is perhaps very important for futures literacy as well. So when you speak about this radical life skill, how is, say, a critical thinking, if you could give an example of how that would be different, and how perhaps futures literacy as a capability or skill itself is a separate skill than the skills that, although you need these other skills, how is it different from these other skills?
Yeah, one current conversation that we're having right now in Australia about the future of
us humans is that the need for us in the age of artificial intelligence or highly augmented digital world is the emergence of new types of purposes. And what are those? Those are the things that we're currently exploring. And one perhaps ridiculous idea that they had that they explored and packed in Dubai probably is the idea of trying to figure out ways to repurpose human purpose, right? In a highly AI automated world. So where do we situate ourselves? What are the kinds of products and services, and things that we can do that AI can't do, right? That builds hope, that builds wealth, that builds new opportunities for us as human beings. Another thing that we learned at the University of Sunshine Coast is the idea, the core of relationality. I think that is the one radical life skills that we need to learn if we want to transform our communities in a highly dystopian world, is for us to learn how to connect with each other. Because, that is at risk in a highly digital and augmented world. Like we end up becoming lonely despite our hyper-connectivity, in a global context. In fact, the World Economic Forum has said this, that one crisis that we need to look into further is loneliness, right? There will be some sort of epidemic or pandemic of loneliness in the next 5 to 10 years. So how do you actually resolve that idea, or perhaps, change that or transcend, or, perhaps avoid that kind of, dystopian future where each and every one of us are lonely, right? Yeah? So the idea to build connections, the idea to respect diversity, the idea of having the capacity to make sense of what inclusivity mean for us, at a planetary level, because that is not easy, right? So another thing, perhaps, of course, is advocacy, right? It's not enough for us to talk about skills and paint beautiful futures about the future. These are systemic issues. They are intergenerational long-term issues. They cannot be resolved in 5 to 10 years. So it requires a lot of skills that must require the need for us to develop the capacity to advocate for things, for futures that we wish to occur. We were having a conversation about values, right? Mm-hmm. Preferred future is an issue of value judgment. It's not easy to develop a shared future when you have political parties, different ethno-linguistic groups, gender issues, among other things. This can't be resolved in a workshop. These things are resolved at the systemic level, right? And when we get to have a conversation about the preferred future that we all want, it becomes an issue of value judgment. That's where our judgment comes in. And judgment, I think, non-discriminatory judgment as well is a critical life skill that we all need to learn. I'm going to stop on that. But there are a lot of things that we need to take note of, right? Like other than the life skills that we need to be competitive and collaborative in an economic growth scenario. What about in a collapse scenario? What about in a weird scenario or in a transformation scenario?
Arjun, I know you had, in our previous conversations, you were speaking about how imagination and creativity, you've called out imagination as a skill, and Futures Literacy calls it as a separate skill. So if you want to speak to some of that, maybe we can bring the skills discussion to close and move on to the next bit.
Yeah, I also actually wanted to react to something that Professor Sherman said, and I think the point that you made about social connectedness is, I think, very important when we think about future literacy, and I think empathy as a skill is going to play a critical role when you think about future. Otherwise, it is the ability, people with advanced skill sets are the ones who will think about the future, and they're the ones who are actually deciding the future. Whereas, and hence, empathy becomes a very critical skill, a social skill, that I think should be an integral part of any time we think about future literacy. So I think coming back to your question on imagination as a skill, and I think we were having this conversation, and while the Life Skills Collaborative has 52 skills, it doesn't call out imagination as a skill. And I think the debate that opened up there was, is imagination by itself a skill, or is it a starting point, and the action that you build on that imagination is a skill set that you need to build? And the way I've understood creative thinking, which is part of the glossary that we have, imagination becomes a starting point for creative thinking to happen. It is not enough for us just to sit and imagine. We can all sit and imagine anything. But I think it is the ability to do something about that imagination and be creative about that imagination that drives it as a skill. However, we've had that conversation, and I recognize that when you start to open up imagination in itself, there is a certain set of skills that can be taught in terms of how you can be more imaginative as an approach. So it's up for debate. The Life Skills Collaborative Glossary is a living document. So we are happy to take that back to the experts and kind of think about whether imagination needs to be the 53rd skill that we add to the glossary.
Futures literacy.
And that's something that's certainly a possibility.
Thank you.
But one last thing before I give it back to you, I think, it drives from something that was said earlier, where we talk about the need to develop these life skills in young people, and I think future thinking, or the ability to think about the future, is an advanced skill. And I think because people come from their own context, because you're dealing with immediate problems, because I need to know where I will get water to drink today, my future thinking is only limited to solve for that problem for today. It becomes really hard to solve for it in the future. But however, I think it is also an opportunity for us. It is also an opportunity to integrate future thinking into our skill set building today. So when we start to think about building critical thinking in young people, I think we should build the context and build the manifestation of the probable future into that teaching, so that we don't have to learn in steps and we can skip a step, and we don't have to go from, if somebody is using landlines and we don't have phones, we don't have to go for landlines. Mobile phones are available today, so we can skip a whole generation and go directly to mobile phones. And similarly, I feel there is an opportunity today for us to not go through the step-by-step process of saying, first understand the basic of critical thinking and then worry about the future. I think there is an opportunity here to think about building that critical thinking ability, keeping the future in mind, and I think building it together.
Just a couple of points there that you opened up. I think we can't dwell a lot into the imagination and creativity, but I'd just like to reiterate some of the points you brought up. And I think it also ties up to what Professor Sherman said about how perhaps we are looking at life skills currently. And you spoke about how imagination is not constrained by reality, and that, I would say, is the beauty of it also. But you spoke about why it needs to be amount to something. And it ties back to Professor Sherman's argument that we need to stop thinking about instrumental needs of these skills and think more largely. So Professor Sherman, a last comment on you on that, and we will close up the session in the next question.
Yeah, more often than not, we try to frame things because of the function of it, right? The instrumentalist view, like the economic purpose of reasons why we need to build these life skills anyway, because we all must generate wealth. But then, largely, if you come to think about it, life as a context, as a core of what we do, including futures literacy, calls for us, to perhaps expand that view. That requires us to perhaps reflect and immerse ourselves into a conversation wherein we talk about those things that we cannot compromise as human beings, in relation to nature, in relation to our parents, in relation to the divine, those kinds of stuff. Because if these things inspires us, eventually, efficiency and effectivity, comes secondary, and that has always been the outcome of it, and that's why we have empathy now as a narrative in an economic context. But then, again, this is just perhaps, going back to the conversation about radical life skills. I've been reading Indian philosophy for quite almost a decade now. I practice meditation since college. I've learned from the sages' writings. And one thing that just came up to me now as far as radical life skills are concerned is something that we need to perhaps take note of, is for us to figure out ways by which we can build an awakened conscience. That goes beyond empathy. I think conscience goes beyond empathy. Conscience is spiritual. And as far as these challenges are concerned, the youth getting inspired and getting engaged and looking towards the future, I think the conversation has to be spiritual in some sense as well. Because that's what meaning is all about. At the end of the day, if you're going to spend your life spending 30 years, 40 years, creating the future you preferred, at least when you retire or when we die, at least we could say to ourselves that, yes, the journey was meaningful. So life skills, I think, together with futures literacy, has to be a meaning-making, meaning-sensing endeavor.
Thank you, Professor Sherman. Just a last question, just picking on Arjun, the strand of what does it take, and you spoke about multiple stakeholders coming together. How do you see this going forward? I will bring the tensions back up, but I would like to hear from you on what enables collaborative action to bring these skills that we speak about to young children to reality.
So I spoke a little bit about that earlier, and I think the work that we're doing as part of the Life Skills Collaborative, I think we are also answering the question of scale. How do I take the ability of empowering young people with these life skills to scale? And I think your question amounts to that, and I think future literacy, if we add that as a skill, how do I then take it to more and more young people? And I think, and this again, a lot of this is very contextual, and we strongly feel that life skills in general are very, very contextual. And I think from an Indian context, I think we also should recognize the various stakeholders that play a role in shaping the future of young people. I think the dominant narrative in a lot of young people's lives today are their parents. I think we heard the story in the morning where a girl gets up in the morning and she does not even choose what she's going to do, what she's going to wear, where she's going to go. How do you then get a girl like this to think about the future that can transcend the boundaries of her immediate need of that freedom to kind of think? So I think it requires a lot of education, not just for the young people, but also of various other stakeholders. And I think parents, especially in a context like India, play a very important role. Our work in Voices, where we spoke to a large number of parents as well, showed us that young people today are far more aware of these skills than parents are. And many times when you talk to parents, the answer you get is, don't waste my child's time. उसको English और Maths पढ़ना है, ये सब से आप time waste क्यों कर रहे हो? And till the time we don't drive this narrative to the larger community, take it to the community, I think that it's going to be very hard to scale. Similarly, teachers, though much more aware than parents, often confuse the idea of life skills with cooking is a life skill for them, which girls must know. Now that whole narrative has so many different problems from a gender perspective, from an inclusion perspective. So I think there is a need to drive awareness at the community level. There is a need to drive awareness at and the narrative is driven by, somebody mentioned, who is in power needs to drive the narrative, and the idea of education being driven by the government. And we are actively pushing for life skills to be mainstreamed in public education. We feel that life skills are equally important as science and maths, and I think that becomes the second narrative, the recognition from the government to kind of drive that. And I think third is the work that organizations like us, like yourselves, are doing today to make more sense in terms of giving it more context, giving it more structure. And it'll all come down to, can we speak a common language? Can we structure it and put it in the curriculum? Is this something that we can teach children like we teach English and maths?
Thank you. Professor Sherman, back to you. And I know across the world there are initiatives like Teach for Future that's happening. UNESCO has started multiple futures literacy labs. Futures literacy is absolutely non-existent in the country today. What suggestions would you give us going forward to mainstream this?
One thing, of course, live in the present, is that you have to build on the essences that we just churned in this conversation, because this is where the spirit of future or ridiculous or preferred or valuable future begins. I think each and every one of us who are currently here right now, I wish that you embody the meaning that we are just trying to explore and unpack at this time. And when we start to continue this conversation, we begin to continue this conversation and create spaces and platform, that makes the fire alive at different levels, from government to corporates to communities and networks to the villages to our houses to in our sisters and brothers and parents, whatever that might be, from systemic to personal futures, about dreaming radical futures is where we all begin. You know, I remember there was a saying, right? I think it was here, I learned about that. I think it was mentioned by Sadashiva. He said that, you know, look far ahead beyond the future, but always live in the present. So I think this is where it begins.
I guess that's a great way to close. Let futures shape your present, which we started from. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Priyanka, Professor Sherman, and Arjun for that insightful panel. I hope you're also sitting with the question of where is futures literacy in this entire conversation of life skills, 21st century skills, and hopefully you'll kind of find your own answers to that. But I think one question that came to me, because we're talking about foresight and futures literacy, one was kind of going back to the purpose with which we want to sort of equip our learners with. And if it is about them finding purpose and meaning, and if we kind of talk about building agency as the key for our young learners, so if we actually have to imagine what that's going to look like in the future, what's the backcasting we need to start doing today? For that is maybe a good question to ask ourselves. And what do we need to shift in our own ways of thinking, in our own practices, in the way we are organizing ourselves as well? And I think the second thing, which goes back to what maybe Shakil was also saying earlier, that to bring shift, you need to also change the cultural narrative. And how do we bring a shift in that culture in terms of what we are aspiring for and what is it that we are actually holding of value? So with those questions, I'm sure all of you are also very consciously anticipating lunch. We will break for lunch. But before that, I just want to say that after lunch, from 3 p.m. onwards, we will be getting into our parallel tracks. You all have your stickers on your name tags to tell you which parallel track you're heading towards. If you haven't signed up, you can still do that at the registration table. We have 4 interesting parallel tracks. One is on AI and learning, where we have Tech for Dev, OpenAI, Scratch Foundation, along with Quest Alliance, kind of talking about what the future of learning can look like with AI and what's the caution we need to exercise as well. We have future-proofing schools against climate change with restless development. We have a teacher from Assam as part of that parallel track as well. We have Sprouts Environment Trust kind of anchoring that as well. We have AI and Work, which has a very long list of speakers there, and you can see the diversity of the kind of speakers we have there. And we have a futures literacy workshop, so if you want to go deeper into experiencing futures thinking, then head for that parallel track as well. Hall 2 and Hall 1 are on the first floor, the boardroom and the library are on the second floor. You can also scan the QR code for the agenda, which has a map to kind of get directions. So we'll see you back here at around 4:45.